Oh, shit, I was going to use a harp.
Or a lyre.
Yeah, a lyre would be cool, too. Either way, I'm sure if you're going to school in Greece, go ahead and take a seat. The lyre just played. We're ready to go. This is a very interesting episode for me. My co-host, I think, enjoyed it a little bit more. He is the Darth Vader to my Michael Clark Duncan.
There's a connection in there somewhere.
Yeah. You're the Pan to my Satyr. And I believe you are the Poseidon to my Hades. That's my co-host, Professor Chris.
How's it going, everyone? We are getting mythological today. Greek mythology. Would you say that Greek mythology is the most like expansive like mythology? Because there's Norse mythology where you get like Odin, Thor, Loki, all that kind of stuff. You do have Egyptian mythology with Osiris, Ra, all of that. I'm sure there are some other types of worldly mythology that I'm missing out on. Like ancient China has to have some crazy fucking mythology. That's one thing that I didn't even think of. So that mark it down for an episode in the future. But do you think there's any that like would take this top spot from what Greek mythology is?
I think everybody else ripped it off. And I think, well, I don't know if Egypt, oddly enough, probably didn't rip it off just because it seems like they kind of grew up
at some
at
point too.
Yeah. But I think that was probably when the Ptolemies came over and they made some connections. But Greek mythology just was kind of the first. I'm sure, actually, fuck me. China had no idea. But in this kind of central pocket of like Roman mythology or anything like that, there was a lot of shit that was taken from Greece. Greek mythology is, I feel like, kind of the grandfather of mythology. Just the way that the characters, and we'll talk about how they may or may not have been created, but it was kind of like the first story that everybody's like, oh shit, this is really intriguing.
It was the first almost like widely recognized fiction that became nonfiction after a certain period of time. And that's, I think, what might be the most interesting thing to me is like, how did all of this actually, like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was this a established religious belief, and then you had a bunch of poets and authors and playwrights catalog all of this down for like what God did what? Or was this just something that started to kind of get some steam and was invented by a couple people or in certain regions, and then all of a sudden it got pieced together out of that?
I really, you and I have talked about it just back and forth over studying during the week, and I don't know if there's really any understanding of how any of this was founded. Like, when you go back into history and there's concrete things that happen, you can see like markers of kind of when these things took place. You're going to find all sorts of relics from that period. Yeah. Greek mythology could go back so far. I mean, it goes back to the beginning of the world. We're going to talk about the creation myth, but there's nothing concrete that's tying to it. So it could have been created out of hunter-gatherers, had Apollo and had Ares and had
Zeus, Poseidon, like anything.
No, the Artemis.
Oh,
like,
yeah, the god of the hunt.
Yeah. Then you talk about agricultural side. Farmers had their god. They had their, I think it was Athena. Like, she was a god of the harvest. So everybody, when they come together to form Mycenae, the city-states that would come to form Greece, instead of warring, they're just like, well, you're sure that works? And they're like, yeah, no. Ares takes care of all of our hunting. They're like, okay, well, he's cool with us. If he helps feed us, we're cool with that too.
Okay.
And then agricultural, just the same thing. Like, I think that it could have been just an amalgamation of that, but I think it's just as likely that it could have just been somebody like, oh, these sound like I could make some good characters out of.
Do you know how I think we're going to make this determination? We get into this episode, we really get down to the nitty and gritty on it.
Let's make it happen.
All right. So, like everything else, or like any recognized religion, and for a long period of time, this was a recognized religion. That's why essentially we know so much about the Greek gods. It all starts with a creation myth. And the creation myth, just from a
Yes.
creative standpoint, is we're going to sound crazy when we're talking about this. We're going to sound higher than we actually are, talking and discussing about the things that were essentially drafted and created by these storytellers. And basically, kind of how most creation myths, it's in the beginning there was nothing. And then what came into being was chaos, correct?
Yeah, and chaos could be a idea or a person.
Very fast and loose. The Greek, and here's the thing too, is there's so many different versions and sources. I kind of compared it with Adam to like if you have a comic book character, but you have a whole bunch of different story or showrunners or story runners that are doing their own versions of that character. You have these playwrights, poets, authors that were essentially creating different aspects of these gods, but kind of keeping it along the same character, just kind of telling a different tale, I guess. And so sometimes you get to where they're discussing by a name a place or a deity or something like that. So they're kind of fast and loose depending on what story you're actually sourcing it from. So we get chaos, which essentially is just like it sounds. There's no order in the universe. And out of chaos, the next one to form would be Gaia.
It's fucking crazy that we just had to start this story with chaos. Like, we couldn't have started it anywhere else.
Like the Big Bang. Well, technically, the Big Bang is chaos because it's just, if that occurred, then it's nothing but infinitely expanding matter
God
just
damn it.
launching throughout the universe.
Stop doing this. Stop pointing to factual stuff that makes sense, that would make sense.
But you have to have a reason why the gods have to come in because they have to create order.
I know, but don't make good points.
Okay.
I think for as much as we've studied this week, I enjoy some of this to death, but there's other parts where I don't like making connections, and we'll talk a little bit about...
You have to have a healthy suspension. Not only do you have to have a suspension of disbelief during this, you just almost have to have a sense of humor about a lot of this shit. Because when there's so much rape, this should be a disclaimer. There is so much rape in Greek mythology. It's I don't know how it made it past throughout history because there's so much rape.
Mm-hmm. I think they
person
probably
on person,
had
animal on person, person on animal,
animal on animal.
A glowing orb on person.
It's everywhere.
Rain on person.
I think maybe this frustrates me more because as a wrestling fan, I know what this mindset has to be to take this in. Mm-hmm. You just have to do a full suspension of disbelief. But I know the kind of people that are wrestling fans that can do that, and I know the kind of people that were philosophers that understood that this was a religion.
Wrestling was a big thing in Greece, so maybe there was also story. God, do you think they had storylines in wrestling?
I think there was a Hulk Hogan of Greece.
I don't know, and no one could dethrone them. Then they're like, "Hey, we can make a lot of money, and then have a comeback."
They tanned. They oiled themselves.
They loved the theater, man.
Yeah,
they loved the theatrical. Okay, so getting back to it, so we have chaos, and with chaos, then Gaia forms. So Gaia is essentially the representation of the Earth.
Yep,
she's Mother Earth. Just think of it in that way.
Which. It's about to get real weird for Mother Earth.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. So not only is there a lot of rape, there's also a lot of family-on-family action because you only have a specific gene pool, I guess, that you're dealing with.
There's only 10 of them.
Yeah.
15 of them.
Well, in the beginning, there was only 2 of them.
Yeah, true.
So along with Gaia, you have what's the creation of this thing called Tartarus. Most people that are familiar, even kind of from a cursory knowledge of Greek mythology, Tartarus is essentially like a prison within Hades, within the underworld. That's where whoever is currently the ruling god or ruling class of gods at that time pretty much keeps people. And so within Gaia, essentially, is Tartarus. And it can be recognized, again, we're fast and loose with, is it a deity or is it a person?
And Gaia needs a partner for some reason. I guess to multiply and to make this creation happen. So he gets a guy, his name is Uranus. I'm going to call him Uranus because it's close and I like low-hanging fruit and it's just kind of fucking funny to me. And I think that's actually pretty close to how it's pronounced. But he was this male god figure that had sex with Gaia the Earth. And in doing so, they had children, which don't really know how this all works. Don't know where the kid comes out of. Don't know where he sticks it. I bet it's probably a volcano. Marianas Trench style, maybe.
Maybe.
Could be something like that. But the issue was every time one of these kids were born, they were either a cyclops or something that had, what is it called?
Hecatoncheires. So these are creatures that they have 50 heads and 100 arms. So however you have to scale that in your mind, I really don't. I imagine they would have to be huge with a bunch of tiny heads and then arms all over it. I'm really not sure how that would work. Again, it's Greek mythology.
Arms would have to be like hair on two arms,
Something
just
like
hands and shit.
They mentioned how much like damage they could do in battle because they could throw like 100
Yeah.
stones or something like that.
It's like a fucking rock machine gun.
Yeah. So Gaia, along with I'm going to say Uranus.
Either way.
Okay. Along with Uranus, she has two other kids, Pontus and Aurea. And so she chooses, I guess, Uranus is the choice for this. So she has to make these offspring with something. And after making the Cyclops, which I believe there were 3 Cyclops and 3 Hecatoncheires, you get the Titans. So the Titans, parents, Gaia and Uranus. God damn it. You have me doing it now.
It's so funny.
So the Titans, you get basically precursors to what you're going to see when you think of Greek mythology. You know, you have Poseidon, king of the ocean, or what, god of the oceans. You have Zeus, god of the sky, thunder, lightning. Hades, god of the underworld.
Oh, we're not there yet.
No, I know we're not. What I'm trying to kind of get across is you have the precursor gods.
Oh,
that
yeah.
Basically, they just move into their positions. So you have these established gods already. So you have gods like Oceanus. These are the Titans. So these are the male Titans. Oceanus, Cous, Creus, Hyperion, Iapetus.
Probably talked a lot.
Yeah. And Cronus. You have the females as Thea, Themis, Mnemonic. Okay, so this is where we get the term mnemonic from. So it's Mnemosyne. And again, that's one thing that we'll probably stop every so often and just kind of go off on a tangent about is when we get to certain names, we have terms that we still use today that were based upon these Greek mythological stories. Cronus, that's where we get, because he was essentially a god of, I think they considered time to a degree. That's where we get the word chronological, comes from. So we also have Phoebe, Tithys, and Rhea as the female Titans. So you're all brothers and sisters. Well, what are you going to do?
Have sex.
Yeah.
With each other just repeatedly. Not really in an orgy style, more like a partner on partner pair off, but it was a round robin tournament.
I think they said 4 of them coupled up, and then you had 4 of them that were just kind of like, yeah, not for us. We'll wait till maybe some other people come along and then kind of see how that goes. But you have these Titans who essentially populate Gaia and are the lords over these elements or these deities. Now, you don't have people at this time. There's really no one that they're ruling over. So humanity doesn't exist. It has to be created. And that's going to come into play when we get to Prometheus, correct. So with the pairing off of these Titans, you get Hyperion and Thea. Their child is Helios. Now, Helios is basically the precursor to Apollo. Helios was the original god that had the golden chariot towed by 4 horses that would then pull the sun across the sky. So he was the one responsible for the rising and setting of the sun. And that was the myth, is that when it was the sun moving throughout the sky, it was actually being hauled behind this fucking chariot by this god Helios.
These are all just explanations to me that you would explain to like a 3-year-old.
These are explanations to me that a village elder comes up with when, like you were saying, a hunter-gatherer society, and they're trying to explain, and that person thinks they're the smartest, and they're like, you know what? I bet it's someone pulling it. I mean, how else would it move across the sky? It's got to be like the maker.
Well, and if you're trying to be the high priest of this village and people need answers to questions and you're pretty creative, you can come up with some shit that's going to blow some people's minds. That's all you had to be,
apparently.
Yeah.
If you were just creative, you had that extra spark in your brain. So we have Iapetus and this kind of non-Titan named Clymene. Sorry, we're going to butcher these names going through it, so prepare yourself. And out of that union comes Atlas and Prometheus. Atlas being when you see like the guy holding up the world on his back, that's Atlas.
Yeah, the Atlas stones and Strongman. Didn't Prometheus have a brother, like Emetreus?
Yeah, that was like the antithesis, like they were the opposite. I just went for the greatest hits on this because there's going to be so much to talk about. So yeah, you have Prometheus. Now Prometheus, do you want to kind of wait to get into him when we get into the human creation myth, or do you just want to talk about it now?
I think more so he'll fit into there, but just know that he plays a really, really big role.
Yeah. You were mentioning Prometheus and Bob.
Yep.
Before we started recording. If anyone is I guess you would consider a 90s kid, Kablam on Nickelodeon was all the sketch shorts. It was like, what was the one I was just talking about with the dolls?
Action League now.
Action League. The Flesh, super strong and super naked. But Prometheus and Bob was kind of like a claymation short where you had this, looked like an alien basically, and then a caveman, and he was trying to teach the caveman all these advancements, and he would end up like shooting himself with a ray gun or like dropping a rock on his head or some shit. We then move on to Oceanus and Tethys. Now, out of this union, they banged a lot because they created like 300 river gods. Apparently, there had to be a god that took care of every body of water and every flowing river. And this is where we also get the sea nymphs. And this is from nymphs is where we actually get, because nymphs were very, they were sprightly, they were mischievous, a little naughty. They like to have some fun. So that's where we get nympho and nymphomania from.
I like just the... There's a lot more, it feels like, dirty words come from, not necessarily dirty, but
they were a bunch of
to
savages,
describe sexual stuff, the Greeks kind of have that market cornered
What
for
does
words.
Greek mean? The slang.
Oh, gay sex?
I thought it was just anal.
I guess doing the same
You
sort
gotta be gay
of.
to have anal, baby.
Yeah, there's so much passion.
What do you call it? Is it the etymology of a word?
Yeah, it's of Greek roots.
Yeah.
But our language today is shaped by so many of these words, and Chris has pointed out a few of them, but there's just so many more that we're going to get into as far as even something as arachnid. I mean, an arachnid is a spider, how it comes about. Like, when we were naming shit, like kingdom, phylum, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Kingdom, phylum, genus, species.
They just went straight back to the Greeks, and they're like, "Is there anything close to this? Arachnid, an eight-legged creature."
Ideas we need to start pulling from previous cultures. We then move on to Cronus and Rhea. So they were the last pair to team up with their genitals, apparently. And this is where you get the centerpiece of where I guess what you would call them, the recognized Greek gods, the Olympians. Sorry, that's what they're just called. They're called the Olympians. You get them coming out of this. So the children of Cronus and Rhea were Hades being the oldest. I'm not sure how the rest of the order went, but it was Hera, Demeter, Hestia, Poseidon. Now,
are we skipping the creation myth?
No. Oh man. Oh my god, I can't believe Sorry, I was stuck on my family tree.
This is my favorite part of the episode.
I'm sorry, man. Yeah, I was getting way ahead of myself. Here we go. Okay.
So we're going to read it's called Theogony. This was something that a guy named Hesiod wrote. We'll talk about him a little bit later. He's kind of like he really put the framework out of sort of like Greek mythology, where all this comes from, creation myth. And this is actually from some of his works. So, I gotta read it because it sounds so flowery and nice. All those who were born from Gaia and Uranus were awe-inspiring children, and their own father hated them from the beginning. Because they were producing goddamn, one-eyes. Cyclopses.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And the guys with 100 arms and 50 heads...
You're related. You're gonna have a
That's
few.
true.
You're gonna have some misses, man.
So, first, when any of them was born, he would hide them all away, not allowing them to come up to the light in a hole in Gaia.
was shoving
Uranus
them back
took
up in
delight.
there.
Yeah, he was shoving them back in.
Nope, don't like this one, and just shoved it back in there.
Right back in the puss, man.
Yep.
Just so fun crazy. And he took delight in it, in his evil deed. But she, vast Gaia, groaned, becoming more and more crowded within, and she pondered a deceitful evil craft, right away creating the class of metal known as gray adamant. We don't know what adamant is.
Adamantium. It's
Oh! No way.
adamantium.
Holy
adamant,
shit.
comic book fans, Marvel, like Wolverine, man. Adamantium claws. It's from Greek mythology.
No way.
So much stuff is pulled. Like, it's we couldn't even sit here and cover the tip of the iceberg of it.
She fashioned a giant sickle and showed it to her children. She spoke words of courage, and though she grieved in her heart, "Children of me and an arrogant father, if only you were willing to obey, we could take vengeance for evil and outrage of your father, for he first plotted despicable actions." So she spoke, and fear seized them all. No one spoke a word. But then, almost at once, great crooked counseling Cronus bravely addressed these words to his revered mother. "Mother, I would undertake and accomplish this action, for I feel no respect for the wrongly called father our father. He first plotted despicable actions." So he spoke, and vast Gaia rejoiced greatly in her heart, set him down, hidden in ambush, put in his hands a sickle with jagged teeth, and revealed the whole cunning plot. So, Cronus was the lastborn.
Yes.
He was the final child, which I guess kind of makes sense with what he does.
Yeah. So the way it's kind of explained in this is, so as Uranus and Gaia are having their children and everything, first come the Cyclops, I think, and the Hecatonchires. So those just go right back up inside her. He hates them. Well, because they're up inside her and everything, they also have kind of the Titans, or some of the kids are left out. Kronos, I think, is, yes, the youngest. And so she goes to the kids and she's like, "I can't take any more kids getting shoved up in me. Someone's got to do something here. I can't do it. Someone's got to step up." And Cronus is like, "I'll chop off his dick." And so basically she makes this sickle. And I don't know what the scale of this is all supposed to be. The sizing is very, very
point.
strange, the way they describe everything. So
God dick has to be huge, too.
so she finds the metal to craft the adamant in this crevice of this canyon or something, but it's like within her, I guess it has to be.
It's so fucking weird.
I know. So she then hides Kronos in the same crevice. And the whole thing is when Uranus comes to lay with her, that's when...
We got some
Okay,
good stuff
go
here.
ahead. Do it more flowery, then I'm going to do it.
Then he came, physically, walked in. Great Uranus, bring the night with him, and all around Gaia, in his desire for lovemaking, he stretched out and grew longer, all of him, and his penis. But his son, from his place of ambush, reached out with his left hand. With his right, he grasped the vast sickle. That's the sickle that the wife gave him. In his other hand, he grasped Uranus's penis. With its long jagged teeth, and eagerly sheared away the genitals of his own father. He hurled them away to be carried behind him. Not without result did they fly from his hand. The drops of blood that fell down, Gaia received them all, and in the course of the revolving year, she bore the powerful Furies and the massive giants, gleaming in their armor, holding on long spears in their hands, and the nymphs they called the ash tree nymphs, all along the limitless earth. So Uranus's penis blood was soaked up into Gaia.
Chopped it all off.
And she grew straight castration.
What'd they say? They said a root and stem is, I think, the way to describe it. So part of this, goes ahead and chops his dad's dick off. And apparently because he was then no longer able to create children, plus, I mean, I'm sure he's got his dick cut off, so he's kind of out of commission.
Yeah.
That's what allows Kronos, because he did the action, to basically usurp and take over, kind of as what you would consider king of the gods at that point.
And then they all lived on Gaia.
Yeah, and because Uranus is coming over Gaia to lay with her, and he chops it off, you get him tossing the dick onto Gaia, I guess, and once it churns in the foaming waters and everything...
Yeah. It rolls down into the water somehow.
And it churns in with the water from, off the, the sea near Cyprus, and from that bloody balls and dick and everything like that, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, is created. So, out of a horrible act, something beautiful happens.
Well, and you got to give it all its beauty. When he first cut off the genitals with adamant, I like that genitals was just a word back then.
Oh my God,
too.
there's more to this?
Oh yeah, we got to talk about Aphrodite now. He threw them away from dry land into the surging sea, so they floated on the sea's surface for a long time all around. White foam arose from immortal flesh, and in the foam a maiden grew. She first drew near the holy island of Cytherea. From there she came to sea-girt Cyprus. A revered and beautiful god emerged. Everywhere grass grew beneath her slender feet. Foam-born goddess, well garlanded, Greek city I can't pronounce. So gods and men alike call her because she was formed in foam, but also Cythera, since she came past Cythera. Again, a lot of weird repeating
Wow,
shit.
there's a lot of, like, these towns are all named the same. You got Cythera, Cyprigenia. This is all in Cyprus, apparently.
Yeah. Since she was born on wave-washed Cyprus, and Philomeneus, laughter-loving because she appeared from the genitals. Eros accompanied her, and lovely desire followed, when first she was born, and as she entered the company of the gods. So this is Aphrodite's coming of age from... It was like Aphrodite was his last nut, and somehow he impregnated the ocean, and then Aphrodite came.
It's Gaia, technically, so I guess
yeah.
that's what it comes with. I didn't even think about it that way. That was just the reproduction, I guess. That's how did the other Titans get created? Something probably similar. Probably didn't get his dick chopped off and tossed into the sea, but imagine you're back in ancient Greece, and you don't know anything. I mean, because nothing's really been explained to you. You just kind of know what the people smarter than you have been telling you, and you sit there and you're reading this, and you're like, "Oh man, he chopped his dick off." Well, I mean, he had to, and then he threw the dick in the water, and then it became the goddess of love.
I'm not swimming. Well,
I guess you make love with your dick, and so the dick would make the goddess of. Yeah, I mean, it all checks out. So Cronus takes over. Now there comes a prophecy from Gaia and Uranus, and he's still, God damn it, Uranus. He's still alive. He's just like, basically now he's in the old folks' home, and he's pissed off at Cronus, and so he basically tells Cronus along with Gaia, he's like, listen, same thing's going to happen to you, man. One day you're going to piss off your kid, and you'll be lucky if he just dethrones you and leaves you with your genitals. But he might take them both, and I hope to God that he does. So Cronus is like, fuck. He's probably right. I need to watch out for my genitals here. So as him and Rhea start having kids, as soon as Rhea has the kid and hands it to him, he's like, nope, not going to happen, and basically just swallows the kid.
Like Cookie Monster.
Yeah.
Just as soon as he gets the cookie, he's nom 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 nom.
Swallows them whole, so they're still alive in giant Cronus' stomach. And the first 6 that I was in, well, swallows the first 5. This is where you get what are going to be known as the founding Olympians. Hades, Poseidon, Hera, Demeter, Hestia, and at this point, kind of feeling like Gaia did when Uranus kept cramming all the kids back up inside her. She's like, stop eating my fucking children, man. Like, I keep having to make these things, and then you're just fucking scarfing them down. So, she's pregnant with Zeus. She goes to, I think, Crete, and that's where she actually has Zeus, and basically leaves Gaia and a bunch of, like, they call them oceanids and sea nymphs to raise him. He's basically raised in like a whorehouse, which I think comes back into play.
We're still moving past some beautiful stuff here.
Okay, go ahead.
But when she was about to give birth to Zeus, father of the gods and men, she implored her beloved parents Gaia and starry Uranus. When somebody moves on to a different place, they always put like a starry in front of them or like a Hades in front of them if they go to the underworld. Like it's kind of like a second generation, like they were, or not second generation, but like they were removed from the story, but they were just in a different place. To devise a cunning plan so that she could bear her beloved child unnoticed, and the furies of her father could exact revenge for the children great crooked counseling Cronos swallowed. They listened eagerly to their beloved daughter and obeyed. They revealed to her all that was fated to happen concerning Cronos the king and his strong-hearted son. They sent Lyctos in the rich community of Crete when the time came for her to give birth to her youngest great Zeus. Immense Gaia received the child from her to raise and keep safe and broad. Carrying him through the swift dark night, she came first to Lyctos. Taking the child in her arms, she hid him away in a deep cave beneath the hiding places of holy earth on the forest-covered mountain of Aegeon. Wrapping a large stone in a baby's blanket, Rhea offered it to Uranus, wide-ruling sun, king of the earlier gods. Taking it in his hands, he put it down inside of his belly, the vile fool. He did not think in his mind that in place of the stone his son remained for the future, untroubled, undefeated, soon to overpower him and deprive him of his honor, and rule among the immortals.
Do you think at that point he'd just eaten so many kids that she was just like, by the fourth kid, she was just like here, and he didn't even think about it. He's like just doing something else. He's like, oh, hey, another kid, okay, and just like swallows it.
So I guess from maybe a different poet, I had heard that part of the reason why he snuck in there and slammed down the baby so quick was because he had walked in, he had seen Rhea was swaddling it already and holding it close and forming a connection, and he's like, well, she really hates it when I eat these kids, and I don't know if I want her to get real close to this
my
one.
kid's fresh out of the oven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he just ran over and grabbed it and ate it and would just like down to the hatch and looked at her. He's like, hey, sorry, you know the rules. You know I had to do this.
So over the years, Zeus essentially, grows up in hiding and everything, raised by Gaia. And because Gaia was essentially kind of in on this prophecy along with Uranus, was like, hey, your kids are going to overtake you. And plus, it's her grandkids. She's like, quit eating my fucking grandchildren. So Zeus basically gets a trick either from Gaia and learns how to make something. It's like mixing mustard with wine. And basically, it's supposed to cause I imagine why it would cause nausea, but it's supposed to cause you to fucking throw up. I could imagine mixing mustard or whatever they had for mustard back then with wine.
Zeus's first wife was...
Zeus's first wife was a Titan Metis.
Yeah, Metis was the one that gave him the potion.
Okay.
To give to... Well, in what I read, she gave him the potion, and they were already hooking up together, so it was like uncle... or aunt and nephew.
Yeah.
So that was pretty weird, but she was in on this whole plot too.
So he becomes, through like a series of disguise and deception, he becomes a cupbearer to Cronus. And basically the cupbearer is the one that like fetches you your food and your drink. They're supposed to be testing it out for poison. So anything that you get from them, you're going to be like, oh, you already tested it and you checked it out. So he ends up getting Cronus to drink this fucking mustard wine and basically causes him to throw up all of his other siblings, fully formed, now adults, because they all grew up in there.
Yeah.
They're gods. They don't need food or apparently air or anything like that. They were just, all five of them just hanging out in Kronos' stomach, plotting their fucking revenge.
This is where the scale really takes a turn into not make sense land.
It has at this point.
Well, I mean, adult gods growing up inside of somebody's body, and nobody was like, "What the fuck's wrong with your stomach?"
Someone just threw a dick in the ocean and made a lady.
Yeah,
and you're sitting here upset about these stomach kids.
You justified it though. You kind of made sense.
Okay. So now that they're loose, well, the prophecy's got to fulfill itself, and these guys are pissed off. So the original Olympians go to war with the Titans, and because this is primarily like Cronos versus his kids type fight, you do get some of the Titans, and there are 12 of them. You do get some of them that are kind of stepping back and not really participating in this, and are just kind of being like, hey, this isn't really our fight. And you get other ones that are legitimately fighting, and then other ones that are like, fuck, Cronos told me I had to fight.
Well, and then Zeus, in an homage to his grandmother Gaia, goes ahead and releases the Cyclopses that his grandfather had imprisoned, and then his father had kept in prison because I guess he didn't like him either.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a stalemate at this point between the Titans and the Olympians. The Titans, they said each kind of successive generation of these gods were a little bit weaker than the previous ones. So you see where they have to try to gain an advantage because they're always kind of overtaking each other. So, you had to have basically Cronos use trickery and his mother building him a weapon to cut off his dad's dick. So Zeus, he does free the Cyclops, and he frees the Hecatoncheires. And by releasing the Cyclops, they were essentially like the craftsmen and they forged all like the weapons and things like that. They were masters of smithing.
Yeah.
So they're the ones that actually build him his thunder and lightning bolts and build the weapons for the Olympians. They also built a trident for Poseidon that could control the oceans and could also maybe cause earthquakes because he was also the god of earthquakes. And then also the helm or helmet of darkness
Hell yeah.
for Hades, and that would make him invisible, correct?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So designs him for the big three. You get then what's called the Titanomachy. Is that how you pronounce it?
It's Typhonomachy.
Titanomachy. Basically, it's Titans versus Olympians. And you get into a 10-year war between the Titans and the Olympians. And basically, once they release the 50-head, 100-arm guys, it turns the tide because you've got, like you said, these fucking boulder machine guns, super strong Cyclopses on your team, and they're basically able to take Cronos and the Titans that fought against them, and I believe they imprisoned the Titans in Tartarus.
Yep.
So basically the place that Uranus liked to... God damn it, man. Uranus liked to lock people away. I'm going to be glad when we get away far enough that I don't have to mention this guy. Would lock away the people he didn't like. Same thing with Cronos. He would lock away the people he didn't like in Tartarus. Well, now they're locked in Tartarus themselves, and Zeus is like, you know what? We're going to switch things up. Hecatoncres, you're going to be in charge of guarding Tartarus. So now you get to step outside the bars and play warden.
The prisoner has become the guard.
Yeah, the prisoners have taken over the prison. So as the Olympians win, they're now the prime deities in Greek mythology. Atlas, who was the second in command, is at this point made to fulfill what the Greek mythology with Atlas is he's forced to hold up the sky and the heavens. So he's basically put, I don't know how they symbolize it, like put somewhere underground, or he's put in a location. Maybe they said he was even near the Atlas Mountains in Africa, which is why the mountain chain is called the Atlas Mountains. And that was him basically holding up the sky and the heavens. And that's what he was essentially punished to do with for the rest of eternity.
Yeah, there's so many things that they think of to explain shit. And that's where I keep coming back to was these people had questions, and the guy that wanted to be the smartest guy in the room was like, well, the sky's up there because Atlas held it up there.
Who's Atlas? Fuck. Atlas was this guy that came before Zeus and all of them. Oh, okay. So was he like his dad? No. His brother?
Yeah.
Was his dad? Oh, well, what was his name? Fuck. You know what? It's getting late, guys. I'll tell you about it tomorrow night. And the guy has to go back and basically write a whole bunch of backstory for all of these gods. So now we get to kind of the main part of it, where it's the rule of the Olympians. This is kind of the stage where Greek mythology I feel like this is what came first when they were getting all this stuff established, and then they established the backstory with Cronus and Uranus and Gaia and everything to kind of give it a starting point and figure out how these people came into being. So, yeah, the ones that kind of started: Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. Obviously, Aphrodite is in there because she is down on Earth after being made out of Granddad's dick. You also get some people added in there as well. For the 12 Olympians, you get Athena, Artemis, Apollo, Ares, Hephaestus, Hermes, and kind of in an interchangeable position. Sometimes you get Hestia, and then sometimes you get Dionysus.
Gotta go with Dionysus over
Hestia.
Hestia.
100%. If I had my way, it would be Dionysus.
So, before we get into those guys, we kind of got to talk about where all this shit came from as far as the poets go.
Yes, please.
Before we jump into that, let's hit the bathroom real quick.
Okay. Well, hey there, all you sexy historians. How you guys doing?
It is time for
socials.
Where can they find us on Instagram?
If they want to follow us, they can find us at Historically High Pod on Instagram.
That goes the same for Threads as well. You can also find us on Twitter.
Tell them about Twitter.
Historically High. That's Historically HI on Twitter.
And if you want to email any of your comments or suggestions, where can they find us at, Adam?
At historicallyhighpodcast at gmail.com.
Gmail. All right, and back to the show. Then we're back. All right, so to break this down, it's kind of a collaborative effort here of all of these different Greek philosophers, or I don't even call them philosophers, writers.
Poets.
I still have a hard time thinking of the Iliad and the Odyssey as epic poems. They're books.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. For some reason, I always have to think poems have to have a rhyming element to it.
There's some sort of a scheme to it, but I think there was, because there's like iambic pentameter, and it was a way of speaking kind of in a cadence.
Yeah, I guess that is true. So basically, along comes Homer. We did an episode on the Iliad and the Odyssey. If you haven't listened to it, go back and check that one out. Basically, that provided a lot of introduction and insight as to the relationship of the gods. One of the main characters, I think, within the Odyssey is Poseidon, because that's the whole point where Odysseus is coming back from the Trojan War, and through pissing off Poseidon in some way, he gets taken off course and then runs into all the adventures and yada, yada, yada. Go back and listen to that episode.
Well, there's so many different factors in the Iliad and in the Odyssey where we kind of see, and listening to the episode will kind of explain it better, but Apollo will jump in on one side, and
he was like the patron, or as it's stated to be, he was like the patron of Troy.
So when that happens, they go into battle, and you kind of see a little bit of like the drama that there was in the God world, as far as trying to almost run human beings like they are little chess pieces. And so you get kind of a feeling for who's friends with who's on the side of who, kind of just how they look at human life like they are just a game that they're playing.
Like, yay, my city won. My city beat your city.
And going into that, the Trojan War, we're pretty sure happened. And I believe it's northwest Turkey, around the sea, around the Aegean. There's a city that, through just kind of going through and excavating the city, they found that it's been sacked and razed like 10 times. He was born maybe around 850 BCE. Homer was, yeah. They said that his works were recorded like 200 years after the Trojan War. So we're talking about 1000 BCE. They went through, checked the data. They said, hey, there actually was a war that happened here right around that time. So it sort of lends a little bit of a nod to the Trojan War being real, and Homer having like a semi-understanding through oral tradition of what's going on.
That's what I was saying, because some of these places, because it was such a big thing with the Trojan War, there had to have been documented, documents about it, like, storytellers or scribes, whoever you want to, whatever they were back then, keeping those records for the kingdoms that won or the territories that won. So for like Sparta and everything, you then have Homer that comes along and is like, I can just jazz the fuck out of this.
I'm going to punch this up.
And just grabs that information, which was probably not a very good read, and is basically like, let's add some fucking spice to this.
Yeah, you get guys like Achilles, you get guys like Hector. The idea of an Aristia, where you can have certain characters on the battlefield who were really badass that day and killed a lot of people, got a godlike spirit inside them that made them unbeatable in war.
Yeah. It was like a fucking murderous angels in the outfield situation.
A lot like that, yeah. And so there's just so much where I think he did go through, and an event that definitely could have happened, that there was some concrete evidence did happen. He probably put his own spin on it, and that's where we get a lot of fun stuff out of that. Homer's works were the first works known to be published in all of Western literature. The only thing that was really published before that was something called the Epic of Gilgamesh, which we'll do an episode on eventually. It seems kind of cool. But to know that Homer was kind of the first entrant, and he did start to bring Greek mythology from oral tradition onto paper, it just starts to bring into picture this start of mythology.
So coming in after him, you get this guy, Hesiod. He lived around 700 BC. He lived in, is it Brosia?
Brosia.
Brosia?
Yeah.
He was a farmer, so essentially self-taught to be able to write, and he wrote the marvelous works. And then, so sorry, what did you have written up there?
The Marvelous Works and Days. And what it did was it was like the most detailed recounting of the daily life of a farmer in ancient times. So all of the seed planting, how they would do things with the seasons, anything like that. This guy's providing perspective into ancient Greece of how the agricultural industry worked. That's a pretty big picture to paint that we probably use a lot because this guy was a poet, but
Yeah.
at the same time, he was a farmer that went out and worked in the fields.
That reminds me of just hearing about that reminds me of on Parks and Rec, the guy that makes the book called Organize It. And it's the one about organizing your office equipment, but then he writes the second book, which is Organize It Too, but it's basically a Scientology myth that has like a lizard king in space and everything. That kind of just makes me think of that is you have this farmer that basically also writes this book on farming in ancient times, but then also, doesn't he write poems that include the gods as well?
Yeah, because he wrote the Theogony, the one that we just read.
Correct, that's right. So yeah, then he's like, well, my next work is going to be a little different. It's going to be a bit of a deviation from the farming book you guys are used to, but I think you'll still really dig it. It's going to have this guy lopping off this other guy's dick and throwing it into the ocean, and then a hot, sexy woman's going to appear.
Everybody read this like, wow, he was right. This is really different from the marvelous works and days of an agricultural engineer.
That was like you have the women sitting in bed reading it. And it's like, what are you reading? And she's like, just an organizational book. Why you look all flushed? I mean, I just really like organization. It was ancient. It was ancient 50 Shades of Grey is what it was.
So yeah, the Theogony, which he wrote after the marvelous works and days, was just that. It was the birth of the gods. It described the origins of the Greek gods. He also wrote something called the Shield of Heracles, which, spoiler alert, Heracles is Hercules, just the Greek version of it. In his expedition to, it was him and someone named Lolus.
Aeolus.
Aeolus.
I only know that because of the fucking Hercules show.
Oh, okay. Yeah, against Ares' son Sinus. So you have him kind of dipping his toe into beyond Greek gods and into the hero world. We're not getting into the hero world. Those can kind of be episodes in and of themselves because there is a lot about those that kind of everybody contributed to, or at least some points of it. But he's even gone from, like I say, creating Greek gods, the creation myth, all this other crazy shit, to now he's like, well, I got to write about some other cool things, and I kind of pushed this god thing as far as I could. Let me work the other end of it.
Well, and kind of like you had mentioned before we were talking about it, with his viewpoint being outside the aristocracy, being more of a common person, he had that viewpoint of how the common man viewed the gods. Yeah. And how they would look upon, a successful harvest and who they would pay homage to, for that kind of stuff.
So there were no sponsorships from local companies.
Yeah, exactly. So there was that purity to his poems. Coming in after him, you have this guy named Aesop.
Aesop. Aesop's Fables.
Aesop. Is that where that comes from?
Yep.
Okay.
This is him. This is the guy. This is the guy that talks about. He gives us all like the. What the fuck are they called? Like turns of phrase, early bird catches the worm type stuff.
Oh, I can't think of the term for that. It's a saying.
Yeah. But Aesop maybe lived, maybe was real, maybe wasn't, maybe there was just a big think tank behind what Aesop did. His story was that he was a slave and a storyteller. He lived in ancient Greece between 620 and 564. His fables weren't written down for 300 years after he was born. So, I mean, you can probably say that maybe it wasn't always true.
Well, yeah. Well, stuff's always going to kind of get lost in time. One of the guys he really introduced and spoke extensively on was Hermes. Hermes is the messenger of the gods. And once we get into the actual Greek gods, we'll kind of get into who was related to who and how these people came about. But Hermes is the guy that you would think of with like the wings on his boot that was like the, running back and forth. He was the UPS of the gods. And also the gift of speech that was presented from Isis. Now, Isis was a god initially taken from Egyptian culture as well. and co-opted and brought into Greek mythology. So, a lot of these writings might pull, like we've been talking about, and I don't know if I've mentioned why I think this is so fascinating. This is essentially a created story that may have taken factual deities that were being worshipped in different areas, but then made them so cohesive that it was such a recognized religion that these cities were either being named or having gods created after their naming, but then developing these temples and monuments and statues and everything to these fictional characters that were actually created previously by men, but at the same time could then be justified, be like, no, these are just the first guys to write it down. These things actually happened. These guys were just the first people to get it. I've heard these stories are true.
Well, and we're talking about the same guy in Aesop that was talking about all this stuff and talking about Hermes and all that. Also, the guy that created this tortoise and the hare. So slow and steady wins the race is in one of Aesop's fables. So we literally have this guy talking about Greek gods, and then we don't really mention that, but we always preach slow and steady wins the race. Same guy.
Yeah.
Same maybe think tank people, but like we've accepted him into certain parts of modern culture without realizing that he also did this stuff too.
Yeah.
So to me, if Aesop was a real person or not, we've kind of accepted other things that he said as far as going along with those kind of life advice type things. So maybe he wasn't too bad with speaking about gods. Aeschylus will be our next one. He's known as the father of tragedy, which makes a ton of sense that he wrote about the gods because a lot of it's tragedy. Probably a real person, most likely a real person, but he may have lived.
Not too tragic for the gods, mostly for the victims.
Yeah.
The humans that are the victims, that's where the tragedy comes into play.
He lived between 525 BCE and 455 BCE. So as we started out, 850 maybe for Homer, we're starting to move down and get closer to modern day. These guys are still writing these stories. Like the story is still evolving. We're getting other tales and other poems about these certain gods. It's like now we're getting specific about shit.
Dude, it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah?
As soon as they found that a couple guys were popular, all of a sudden they're like, well, let's create some new guys. Let's go ahead and tell the backstories of maybe like the lesser known gods, or if gods don't have already an established backstory, there's something we can, juice up a little bit. Let's go ahead and do that.
Well, and it's kind of a shame because he was believed to have written about 90 plays and only 7 of them have survived, which is a really big issue with so many of these people because Homer, we have the Iliad and the Odyssey. There's a couple other writings, but we lost a lot of his stuff. And if the Iliad and the Odyssey were that great, what else was he writing? What else? What other information about Greek mythology would we be
keep
getting?
It all together. We only had to keep track of two of Homer's works. They were just big and fucking thick. You got to keep it. Just put all those 90 plays into a greatest hits.
Yeah,
keep them all together.
So his biggest probably was something called Prometheus Bound. It's a play that was based on Prometheus creating, protecting, and giving life to humans in defiance of Zeus, which is a really, really fascinating story, just as how it worked. I think you were talking about that a little bit earlier.
So with Prometheus, basically the story behind Prometheus is I'm trying to find out real quick how he is like actually related, because I want to say that Prometheus is actually a Titan, correct?
Yeah, I believe he was like Zeus's uncle.
Yeah, he was one of the ones that kind of took a step back that wasn't in Tartarus, though. So Prometheus actually forms the first human in the image of the gods out of mud or out of clay, and then he uses another one of the gods, I think, brings life to it. Aphrodite brings life to it. So this
maybe
is where
Athena, one of the A's.
There were a lot of Apollo Ares. There was a lot of them. So one of those two then brings it to life, and this is the creation of humanity. Now, because essentially there's no light, where we're living and everything like that, we're living in caves, and Prometheus is trying to get us out into the light. So he takes and introduces fire to us. Now, this isn't the Prometheus stealing fire from the gods yet. We initially had fire that was provided to us by Prometheus. Now, Zeus is like, whoa, 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 I don't like this. I don't like these guys having fire. And he's like, well, what we can do is, because they're going to be having fire, they're going to start butchering animals and everything. They can do offerings to you, and I'll even let you pick what your offerings are going to be. So what he did is he took a bunch of the actual, like, usable meat from the cow, and he wrapped it in the cow's stomach. So it just looked like the cow's stomach. He then took all, like, the bones and the hide and covered them in all of the cow fat and presented them to Zeus. He's like, which one do you want? And Zeus is like, apparently fat was the shit back then. Everything. Yeah. So Zeus looks at this one, all the fat and all the fucking tastiness, and is like, this is what humans will sacrifice to me going forward. This was like his selection of what he's going to be receiving in human offerings, you know, for the remainder of time, whatever it was going to be.
Prometheus bait and switched his ass.
And so then Prometheus is like, okay, this is yours, and basically pulled the wool over his eyes, and humanity was then able to have the meat and the sustenance to essentially propagate and you know, grow. Well, Zeus was like, good luck cooking that fucking meat, and he fucking took the fire back. So we had this meat, and you could only eat raw meat for so fucking long. So Prometheus is like, okay, I'm going to sneak in. Dun, 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 dun. Sneaks in, steals the fire back. Some things he either stole it from, like, the flame of Olympus. Some say it was, like, from one of Hephaestus's forges. But basically then it steals fire and gives it back to man. Now, somehow, is there a no-take-backseat rule after 2 times? Because Zeus wasn't able to take fire back at that point.
Maybe he just got tired of getting beaten by Prometheus.
It was just once. I think there might have been some type of clause. It's like, you get one take. It's like a white elephant type thing.
Can't triple stamp a double stamp.
Exactly. So, as he couldn't punish humanity and take it back, he then punished Prometheus. And basically bounds Prometheus to a rock. And every day sends an eagle, which is one of the representations of Zeus, to eat his liver out day after day. And what would happen is, at the end of the day, when the eagle would leave, the liver would grow back, the wound would heal over.
He's a god. He can't die.
Yeah. And it would start all over the next day. So that's what ends up happening. That kind of sets the tone for what happens when you cross a lot of these gods.
Yeah, vengeance is swift and it is brutal. As far as, like, plays and things like that go, he was the first person that they think introduced a second actor to the stage of plays, which prior to, this is why I think this shit had to be exciting in the first place, was because if there was one guy on stage during a play just reading shit out, like just reading a poem, it had to be spectacular to catch people's attention. When you start bringing a second guy on stage and you can start having dialogue between 2 characters instead of just one man reading it, holy shit, the game has changed.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you're getting a full story now where it's just so back and forth.
That was, someone had to introduce that and been like, what if we have 2 actors on the stage? Like, you're a fucking madman! Get him out of here!
All of a sudden, instead of having to do 12 voices, you only had to do 6.
Yeah.
It just, so crazy how that would have changed everything. Next, we have a gentleman named Pindar.
Oh, how'd he die?
Huh?
How'd he die? Explain how he died.
So, I mean, for all the talk that I had just done about how he did a lot of things, yeah, his ending didn't really end well.
A little bit of it's unceremonial.
No. Allegedly, a turtle fell from the sky that was being carried by an eagle and bashed him on top of the head and killed him.
Who's controlling the eagles?
Yeah, if this whole thing is about fate and what the gods can do, I feel like maybe he got some stuff wrong because his fate slated by the gods was taking a turtle via air to the skull.
An air turtle to the head.
Not great.
All right, so now we get to Pindar. Pindar?
Yep. Greek poet from Thebes. He lived from 518 BCE to 438, and his best preserved work of the 9 canonical lyrical poets. So of like the 9 guys that really hammered down hard, his stuff is the most preserved. We have the most of it. He was actually very close friends with Aeschylus, so I imagine that's a situation where you have 2 guys who are pretty good at writing things, maybe bouncing ideas off of each other.
You got to imagine that's what happened. Is like, let's just make sure we're not overlapping on our characters, and we're not overlapping on our stories.
Yeah.
And what if your guy shows up in one of my things, and my guy shows up
Crossover.
in one of your things? Yeah.
Crossover poems. A lot of his focus of the poems told the stories of the interactions between the gods and the humans, which I think is super duper important when it comes to mythology, because the god to god stories are pretty interesting, but when they go down and start interacting with the human beings, it's just on a completely different level.
It's being able to be like, oh my god, like that could happen to me.
Yeah.
Like that puts the people listening to these stories into a relatable position. Be like, I can't relate to these godly battles, but I can relate to the impact that, like, oh my god, is that why we didn't have a harvest this year? Because it says in here you can't piss off the god or there's a famine.
Yeah, or how do you explain it?
Yeah.
You know, you have to be able to explain it somehow. For as much as we learn from old Pindar, I feel like he might have been full of shit too. He claimed to have met Persephone as she came to him in a vision and asked him why he didn't write more about her. Supposedly he's like, okay, well, I'm going to write some shit and then I'm going to run into you again. I'll give it to you. He ends up dying between these 2 meetings, but it was like a family member who had said 2 days after Pindar had died, he had actually like told her some of the poetry about Persephone. So again, sort of wacko, a little bit crazy.
Not in comparison to everything up to this
No.
point.
No, certainly not. Sophocles, 496 BC was sort of the time that he lived around. He was a priest who may have written around 120 plays. Again, we only get 7 of them. But he wrote about the gods as the stories were without any bias. So it wasn't...
just describing the events as they happen.
Yeah, it was like very clinical.
Like a Walter Cronkite just providing the facts of the news. I'm Sophocles.
Which I think is pretty important, because if you can see things, there's certain ways to maybe make it more believable if it's written in such just a straight along the way manner. He added a 3rd actor to plays, and when you add a 3rd actor to plays, all of a sudden shit changes again 300% instead of just the 200%. His big writing was a little poem called Oedipus Rex. And Oedipus Rex is the story of how the Oedipus complex came to be.
I actually did a project on this in high school.
For what class?
It was for, like, honors English or something.
Okay, I could see that. Yeah. So not on the actual Oedipus complex, but on the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
On the actual story of Oedipus. Yeah. I remember I had this thing in high school where we would be assigned these projects and I would want to do them as video projects.
Yeah.
So we would actually just like all be wearing our normal clothes, but be acting out like the instances of this. So yeah, the story of Oedipus, just in a nutshell, is there is a guy, Oedipus. He's born to a king and queen. He is somehow absconded with or like sent away as a kid. He then grows up. He ends up meeting the king at a crossroads, doesn't know it's his father. They get into an altercation. He kills him. He then goes back. He ends up marrying the queen, who he has no idea is actually his mother. And once he finds out, I think she kills herself, and he stabs his eyes out with like the brooches from her hair.
Yeah.
And then he is sent, like he's banished after everyone finds out that he was fucking his mom.
Real interesting story. Just that it's so totally Greek. Like, if you had to ask me who wrote Oedipus Rex, I would have probably said a Greek name without knowing, just because it sounds so...
But it's very on point for the whole point about, like, the gods all intermingling with family and everything. It's like, well, this wouldn't be too crazy. Is it just written to be another relatable point of being like, fucking your family? People do it too.
Also, something that struck me with it is there is the Sphinx riddle inside of Oedipus Rex, and that kind of made me wonder when the Sphinx was introduced into Greek like writing and like Greek understanding? Because would they have seen one in Egypt, or was this something that they had created in their own mind?
Here's the thing. So the Sphinx is technically a mythological character. I think the reason they did a Sphinx is because whoever the pharaoh was, I can't remember what his name was that commissioned it, but I think
there was some debate.
Correct, I know. But whoever commissioned it, I think they knew of the character of the Sphinx and then had that maybe designed. I don't know. Or if it was designed as something else, I think as we kind of talked about, if it was originally a regular sized lion or like something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they got down there, because they were Roman or Greece and everything like that, whoever was down there was like, you know what? We could probably carve that into a Sphinx, because they knew of that character from mythology.
Yeah, I just...
there has to be some type of crossover, or...
There's no way that you come up with a Sphinx in two different cultures without having some knowledge back and forth.
I think you're absolutely right.
It just blows me away. So those were some of the guys that really kind of helped us understand Greek mythology a little bit more and kind of gave us Greek mythology.
I just had a thought. The Sphinx usually has wings. So I don't know if that would ever come into play for the argument of saying that if that Sphinx was supposed to be originally carved as a Sphinx and they knew what the Sphinx was, there technically should have been wings on it, or even folded up wings on its back.
They just didn't have the material.
Or it wasn't designed like that, and it was actually a fucking tiger, or sorry, a lion, really. And because when they recarved it, all they had stone for was space to carve a smaller head out of it. They couldn't add any stone to it.
Yeah.
To make wings.
Yeah. Either way, it's just so fucking fascinating that these things show up, and they seem like they're so far away, but they're so goddamn close. Greece and Egypt are not that far away.
No, just literally like right across the Mediterranean. That's, and who controlled that whole area the entire time? Like
Greece.
Yeah. So now getting down to it, we're going to start discussing the Olympian gods and kind of the more well-known, more mainstream Greek mythology. So I think we got to start with the big dick in the room. I think we got to start with Zeus.
Yeah, Zeus was the king of the gods. He was the ruler of Mount Olympus. He was the youngest son of Cronus and Rhea. When
technically, probably the justification on that is that he was the most powerful, because he was not in the stomach the whole time. He was able to essentially grow and learn from Gaia and stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess he was trained.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is he probably just was like, hey, I freed all you guys. I did a lot of the work here. I also helped win the war, so I'm going to be king of the gods. So he divided it up. Essentially, him and his brothers Poseidon and Hades were really the ones that kind of divvied up what would be the major portions.
Yeah.
And
underworld, oceans, and
then,
skies.
And then they would share the earth.
Because that's grandmother. That's Gaia.
Yeah. We'll share grandma.
Everybody just stay out of her holes. We don't know what else our grandfather put inside of her.
Exactly. So Zeus was also his Roman name. We'll give you the actual Greek name and then what their Roman counterpart, once Rome pretty much just completely stole all this shit.
That's exactly it.
The Roman version of Zeus is Jupiter. Again, king of the gods, ruler of Mount Olympus. The reason that they were on Mount Olympus is during the Titanomachy, that 10-year war between them and the Titans. They had Mount Olympus, and the Titans were based on Mount Orthus. Mm-hmm. And so they just pretty much kept that.
And Mount Olympus, to this day, this is just a thought that I had, and I think that we kind of talked about a little bit. 9,500 foot. What, that's got to be like 50,000 kilometers. I didn't do the research on that one. A lot of kilometers, 9,500 feet in the air. Definitely above cloud cover. So on
at some points,
yeah,
when it was clear. I mean, you could see the peak, but you couldn't see detail on it.
But at the same time, when you're answering a question and you're not allowed to, or you're not able physically to climb to the top of Mount Olympus, when it goes beyond the clouds, you're gonna be like, well, how does that happen? What do you think happens up there?
It's just some guy that came up with it and is standing in eyesight of Mount Olympus. He's like, so where do these gods live? And he's like, see that big old, that fucking tall mountain up there that you can't see the top of it because the clouds are covering? He's like, yeah. He's like, that's where they live. I'm like, oh, okay, makes
Some
sense.
sort of super strong Greek weed as you're laying at the base of it, looking up at it.
This guy was the poon hound of the skies, which is ironic because I also have an uncle that went by that moniker for a while.
God, I hope we get to meet him.
But yeah, so Zeus did not have any problem spreading it around to the willing or the unwilling. So I'm just going to go through here. Zeus is essentially his lineage. So we have Zeus and his first wife, Metis, who was what would be considered an Oceanid. I think she's one of the daughters of Oceanus and whoever he was with.
Yeah, she's about to play a real big role in this.
So she is also was one of the titans of like wisdom. So I think that he figured that kind of shored up some of his weaknesses, maybe if he wasn't that clever.
And he wasn't.
So she ends up becoming pregnant, and Zeus is like, "Oh fuck the prophecy! Kids are gonna fucking kill me." So first thing he does, he's like, "Well, it didn't work last time because when they're just gonna make me vomit up the kids. What if? Hear me out. I swallow her with the baby inside her, kind of get myself like a double protection type situation."
Kid's not born yet. There's no way it can be born inside of me.
Exactly. So he eats, in true fashion of his family, he eats Metis.
Oh, details of that story, please.
You go right ahead.
So, supposedly, and I don't know which one of the poets this came from, old Zeus was climbing up Mount Olympus as a billy goat, trying not to make any noise to try and make sure that Metis doesn't understand what's going on. When he gets up there, he turns back into Zeus, and of course Metis is still awake, and he's trying to come in quietly. She's like, I heard the thunderstorm outside. And he's like,
I heard your
that wasn't me.
I heard your hoofs fucking clopping at the side of the mountain.
He's like, yeah, I busy at the office. It took some time to do some shit. And she's like, you don't love me anymore, do you? And he's like, no, I love you. Why would you say that? She's like, I see all of the things on earth that you're having sex with, and you're not having sex with me, and we're not having a child. And he's like, well, I got to throw her off the scent somehow. I just need a little variety, babe. And she's like, so what do you mean? He's like, can you change into a cow? She's like, that does it for you? And he's like, oh, you don't know what cows do to me.
Moo.
So she changes herself into a heifer. He changes himself into a stallion, and they just start going at it in this.
Wait, he turns into a horse? Or a bull?
Stag. Stag, I think was the word I was looking for.
A deer?
Oh, fuck, dude. I
guess I'm focusing on the wrong details. I'm like, well, did they at least turn into the same animal?
So every time I started doing this research, whether it was work time, regular sober times, or anything like that, I immediately felt high just because of the craziness of this shit. So she turned into a cow. He turned into the male equivalent of a cow.
Okay.
A heifer.
A bull.
Is it a bull?
Yeah.
Okay. They start going at it grandpa style as a cow and a bull. All of a sudden he's like, change to this. She all of a sudden changes to that. I believe it was something below water. I think it was like a dolphin, and he turned into a shark or something like that. So they're going back and forth, and they're going back and forth. And finally he's like, I need you to get small. And I immediately thought of the guys.
The boys.
They're the boys.
Oh.
Yeah. When the small...
And he crawls inside the other guy's dick?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she turns into a fly. As soon as she turns into a fly, Zeus turns back into his normal form, grabs the fly, throws it in his mouth, and eats her. That was how he tricked Metis into getting eaten, basically. Well, crazy story. No way that guy was...
not any crazier than the other shit we've discussed.
No way that guy was sober when he wrote that, though.
So Zeus starts getting headaches, and he's like, oh, my fucking head. And it gets so bad that at some point he goes to... Is it Hephaestus that he goes to?
Yeah.
And he's like, I need you to take an axe, and I need you to split my skull open right about here. So Hephaestus is like, okay. So as they split his skull open, out pops Athena, fully formed, I think in her armor.
Yep.
Fully formed goddess of wisdom, warfare, Athena. And she had inherited her mother. Yeah, don't know where Metis was.
Digested,
yeah,
I guess.
I guess so. But basically it had inherited her mother's gift for wisdom. So she's the new wisdom goddess. After Metis, that thing got ugly. He's
Yeah.
not paying alimony though in that situation. Zeus ends up hooking up with his sister Hera. Now, in between all of this, Zeus is just plowing all across Greece. So these are just the ones he's like setting up shop with up on Olympus.
Everything he can get his hands on, he's having sex with,
Yep.
I think.
So-
he was fucking pronouns. Or nouns. He wasn't fucking pronouns, he was fucking nouns. He was fucking a person, place, or a thing.
Yeah,
Like, that was
exactly.
just all he did.
Yeah. So the two main children that come out of him and his sister Hera banging are Ares, god of war, and Hephaestus, who is basically the blacksmith of the gods. Now,
We gotta go into my favorite Hera story.
okay.
The story of Io.
Okay.
So, Zeus had eyes for this mortal woman named Io. He went ahead and headed down to Earth. Hera was a little bit of a nosy Nancy. She liked to keep tabs on him. I can understand
wasn't
why.
she like the goddess of marriage?
Yeah. Yep.
She's like, how does this fucking look on me?
We're about
I
to
can't keep my own husband from fucking everything in Greece, and I'm supposed to be the goddess of marriage that people pray to make their marriages last.
Well, it turns out philandry is the method that they chose to make their marriage last. Zeus sneaks down Olympus and he sees Io, and he's like, "Well, shit, Hera's gonna
All
look."
I see is Zeus sneaking out like tiptoeing. He's like sneaking out for pussy.
So he gets down to Io. He's like, "Well, shit, I don't want Hera to see." Brings in some clouds so you can't see down to Earth from Mount Olympus.
Are you sure she's not gonna find out? Hey, watch this! And he just snaps his fingers. Clouds come over and block. He's like, "I got you, baby."
It's like the glass that fogs up so you can't see.
It just turns opaque.
So they start getting down. Zeus smashes Io. And then all of a sudden the clouds part and Hera's standing up there. And Zeus turns around, and as he turns around, he turns Io to a cow. He's like, "Oh, hey, babe, what's going on?" She's like, "What are you doing down here?" He's like, "I just admiring this cow." She's like, "Really? You got cow all over your penis?" He's like, "I really admired this cow." She's like, "Oh,
You know how I feel about cows, honey. It's not another woman.
no,
Just a cow.
There's no chance it's another woman. It's just a cow."
You're not the goddess of protecting animal husbandry or whatever.
Oh, all of a sudden, bestiality is
Yeah.
such a big deal. So Hera goes, "Well, I mean, if you really like the cow, I guess I really like the cow. Can I have the cow?" And so he's like, "Done with her? Sure, go ahead."
I guess.
Goes ahead.
Just as the cow's walking out with Hera, the cow turns back and looks at him. He's just like, I don't know. Shh.
So, Hera, knowing that this cow kind of has Zeus's eyes, goes ahead and gets Argus, one of the 50-headed, 100-armed hectalions, hecatoncheires, to keep guard. He doesn't sleep. He's a very strong man.
I just see her walking down, towing the cow behind her, and he's like, "What can I do for you, Hera?" And she's like, "I need you to watch this cow, and I need you to keep Zeus from fucking it." He's like, "What?" And he's like, "Just keep my husband from fucking this cow." Okay.
That's all you want from me? Yeah, just
Okay.
keep an eye on him. So Zeus, wanting to get himself second to Io, goes ahead and calls up his son Hermes. He's like, "Hey, man, we'll talk about all of Hermes' strategies and to do things later. He's pretty badass." It's like, "I'm going to need you to go down there. I'm going to need you to distract Argus. Excuse me. And then I'm going to need you to bore the shit out of him so he goes to sleep, and then I want you to kill him." So Hermes does as his father's told. He goes down, tells Argus a couple stories. Somehow the god, or the Heckerbacher, whatever he is,
Okay.
that doesn't sleep is all of a sudden bored to sleep. Hermes then kills him.
He's like the energy vampire from What We Do in the Shadows.
Yeah.
He's just like, "Oh, I'm so tired."
So Hermes goes ahead and kills Argus, which means that Zeus can sweep in and bang her one more time. Hermes he did his part.
As the human or the cow?
Maybe a little from column A, a little from column B.
He's like, "This is going to sound weird, but I'm going to change you back to human halfway."
I want to try something. Eventually, she ends up turning back into a human again. She birthed 2 of Zeus's children. Argus must have done a pretty decent job. There must have been some good times guarding him, because Hera took all of Argus's eyes and put them on the feathers of a peacock. So all those dots up there are supposed to be representative of Argus's eyes. That to me feels like it takes a lot of creativity to come up with.
Oh, yeah.
That's some crazy shit. So yeah, Zeus all around. I mean, he changed into a goose, and I believe he raped one of his sisters. He actually ends up producing a fair amount of some of the other gods that we're going to talk about, just as far as where things cross and intersect. Next, I think this guy probably, I don't know.
I'll go through his kids real quick.
Okay.
I'll go through Zeus's random Zeus. I just put Zeus and randoms. So with these women who definitely weren't his siblings, he has Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, Persephone, Dionysus, Perseus, and Hercules. Hercules. So yeah, he's busy, and basically most of the gods that I just named are the 12 Olympians. So he just pretty much fills this thing up with his family.
I think doing the totals, what I saw was his 6, what they believe were wives, like gods that he had fucked. Mm-hmm. He ended up having 22 children. And then as far as like animals or women that were mortals.
Sea creatures.
Yeah,
like
sea
that.
creatures, yep. I think he's had somewhere around 128 that they had mentioned and known of. So that took a lot of character development to get through all the things that he banged.
So who's Zeus fucking this week? In this issue, who we having Zeus fuck? We haven't had him fuck a cow, I guess. Okay, perfect. Let's brainstorm. Let's workshop that.
It's just a deer that runs by the doorway, and they're like, "Oh, fucks a deer, gets her."
Perfect. How's he gonna catch it? And go.
Shit. I don't know who's my favorite between these next two. Zeus definitely isn't my favorite. Zeus is a very flawed character. But we'll talk about Poseidon next. Poseidon, Roman, Neptune. There's kind of a theme with a lot of these gods' names and the planets. I think through no research, Chris and I kind of surmised that there's a good chance that since the Greeks were so good at astronomy, that they were the ones that named the planets, and the Romans were like, well, shit, we don't want to keep their same names. What do we do? And they're like, we'll do the planets. They're like, well, they named the planets after the gods. Like, perfect. That works.
We'll just rename them.
Yeah.
We'll just rename ours. So, yeah, you have Uranus. You have Mercury, who was, I don't know if it was Roman, but it was like basically Hermes, like the god of speed. You have Venus, god of love. Earth, I'm not sure what Earth was. I don't know if that was just Terra at some point or anything like that.
We renamed this shit.
Mars, the god of war, which would be Ares. Jupiter, Zeus. Saturn is someone in there. I can't remember who Saturn is. But yeah, pretty much all of those named after Greek gods. That's how big fucking Greek mythology is. The fucking planets are named
huge
from characters of originally Greek mythology.
He was a god of seas, god of water, god of storms, god of hurricanes, earthquakes, and horses.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
At that point, they were like, man, this guy's real water-based. This is basically Aquaman at this point. We're like, what does he do if he needs to do something on land? Like, he's got to have some type of land-based power. They're like, oh, fucking... what is in the ocean that's also on land? Seahorses? Land horses. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Could be the god of horses.
Had to be somewhere along those lines to get that shit figured out. He was the middle son of Uranus and or Cronus and Rhea. And he was an interesting fella. Like you said, he had the trident. The trident was the power of all of everything. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was able to push shit down the rivers, anything like that. He had married a sea nymph named Nereid, Amphitrite.
Amphitrite?
Guess as good as mine on that one. And he actually competed with Athena to be the namesake of Athens.
I think when we did Athens, we actually
did we talk about this?
The creation myth between him striking his trident in a spring came up, and he also was like, and horses. And they were like, oh shit. And then Athena was like, have you guys ever heard of olives? And grew a tree, and they're like, oh fuck, olives. Okay, we're naming it after Athena.
And then Poseidon definitely had to take the spring back so they didn't water the olive trees with the spring that he just gave, right?
That he didn't leave that. It's like, nope, and he hit it on the ground again, and it just dried up real quick. One of the things about Poseidon is, so he doesn't nearly have the fucking black book that Zeus has, but he does have some interesting things that he creates as part of Greek mythology. So the myth with him is that he actually hooked up with the Gorgon Medusa. So fucking snakes for hair, snake for body. They didn't have a child initially, but after Medusa's death, because they had banged it out, she gave birth after her death to the Pegasus. So that's where we get the winged horse Pegasus from.
What is he saying, Your Highness, when he talks about jerking off in front of a Pegasus?
That it's one of his goals.
I don't remember if it's from Your Highness, but
You got to be real high to get through that movie, so it's
yeah.
So you don't remember a lot.
Well, and I mean, Pegasus of Pablo Escobar fame, when his daughter wanted a unicorn, so he went ahead and stapled a horn to its head and then stapled wings to its back. A little bit of a Pegasus look. I don't understand quite how a snake-like creature and a god of the sea produce a horse with wings, but he was the god of horses.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Maybe he could just call his shot, but he knew what sperm he was using, and he's like, I'm going to power of horse. And he was like, okay, you're pregnant with a horse. Jazz it up a little bit, dude. Put your own spin on it.
That, or maybe that's how he became the god of horses, was they just produced a Pegasus. He's like, hey, check this shit out. Look what I can do.
I made the best horse. I'm now Lord of Horses.
The old man of this whole tale, Hades, the oldest son of Cronus and Rhea. He was the god of the Greek underworld, the overseer of the dead. The Greek afterlife is super duper interesting to me, just because I don't really know quite how it fits into a lot of religions as far as what they believe in the afterlife.
Well, let's do this. Let's take a little tour, MTV Crib style, through the underworld.
Yeah.
Like Hades opens the door, he's like,
give it
what's
to
up?
us.
I'm Hades. This is my crib.
I like that.
So you would get to Hades after you died, and the first thing you would really get to would be essentially like the river Styx. It would separate the whole of Hades and the different areas, essentially, of Hades, which we'll discuss. But in order to get across there, you had to pay the boatman, Charon. And also guarding that area so you couldn't sneak through would be Cerberus, the three-headed dog.
Badass.
There was also a two-headed dog as well. I can't remember what its name was. But Hades had to have been there at like the pound and been like, this one's got 3 heads. I want that one. If he dies, I'll come back for the two-headed one.
The two-headed one's just fighting amongst each other, or fighting amongst the heads together. He's like, that guy's going to get distracted. I need a 3-headed dog. I need somebody on patrol at all times.
So once you were able to go ahead and get passage across the river Styx by Charon, you would essentially be pretty much it's like fucking Hogwarts, basically.
Yeah.
You're taken across the river by dead Hagrid, and you're going to get sorted into one of the 3 houses that are in Hades, or the underworld, depending on how you lived your life.
Yeah, and those 3 different places, Elysium was the one that you shot for. It was the paradise of the good, the heroes, the ones that made all the difference in the world.
It was like what you would be akin to like Valhalla. It's like a utopian. It's basically what like you want to imagine in modern Christianity as heaven. Like everyone's happy and there's sunshine. It's always 70 degrees and no one touches the thermostat and all that kind of stuff. You wanted to get into Elysium and dance across the Elysian fields. That's where you also get that badass line in Gladiator at the very beginning, where he's like, if you find yourself riding with the sun on your face and your brother's not around you, you are in Elysium and you are already dead.
Huh. Crazy. I like to think that there's probably 1 or 2 Mormon listeners out there. Think of this as the Telestial Kingdom.
Okay.
Because the way that the Mormon religion works
Can we do an episode on that? Are you in a position to be able to...
I don't know. It's going to be tough. I did 18 years in it. Really kind of... I don't really know how to feel, because at the same time, I got a lot of negative feelings, but it's almost like I was out of the world for long enough that I just kind of... If that's your bag, that's cool, but it's crazy that you're still into it.
We'll circle back on that. Big thing about Elysium, accessibility. It was kind of the club, the velvet rope. You had to meet a certain requirement. Can't have any of those old pregnant bitches up there in the club. But yeah, it was a little bit harder to get into because it was the best of the best. After that, we had the... is it the...
Asphodel?
Yeah, Asphodel Meadows. I love how they also make these sound like fucking like nice subdivisions.
Yeah,
It's like, welcome to Elysium Fields. Welcome to Asphodel Meadows.
I don't imagine that Greece had a ton of meadows because it was mostly rock. Maybe like up near the mountains.
So maybe that's why it was like people are like, oh my
Oh,
god,
yeah.
I don't have to worry about tripping on rocks all the fucking time.
That's a great point.
That's heaven.
Okay, yeah, I could see that. And that was kind of for the rest of society. That was for the people that were neither good nor bad, just kind of led their life, toeing the line.
You didn't kill anyone, you didn't help anyone else.
Yeah, you might have touched some kids or done some other things, but not nearly as bad as the guys that go to the last place.
Mm-hmm. The last place would be Tartarus. And Tartarus was basically, there was also, you know, the prison where the Titans were kept and everything like that. At a certain point, they said Zeus, like, pardoned some of the Titans and, like, let them out. I have to imagine he was like, oh, they can't hurt anyone anymore. They're old. He's just like, I'm going to go ahead and put you guys in a nice home, get you guys set up.
They're immortal beings, though.
I know.
This also, maybe I don't want to bring it up now, maybe I'll bring it up at the end, but there seems to be a very simple fix to a lot of Zeus's problems if he truly was a god here. I feel like maybe he just was strong enough to make himself impotent, shooting blanks.
I think he saw all the kids he was making. He's like, look at all these fucking cool things I'm making.
But these people were all gods, and instead of Cronus being worried about one of his gods showing up and having to eat him, maybe just...
No, but that's why he was also, I think, doing a lot of it with mortal women, because like with Hercules, he was only like a demigod.
Oh, yeah, so Hercules couldn't kill him.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Some of them he did get like, but he could also empower them to be gods, because remember, he would run into circumstances where he would actually make people gods.
Mm-hmm.
So if he was just like, I'll make you a god, you don't seem like you're going to turn on me.
Well, what was it? If they drank the ambrosia, they would become gods.
Yeah.
Also, if a god swore an oath on the river Styx, if he didn't uphold that oath, there was like a year's punishment where you got your goddom stripped from you.
Take a year sabbatical from
Yeah,
being a
what
god.
the fuck?
There was a certain point when Hera tried to like do some type of overthrow of Zeus, and people were pissed off at Zeus's management style. So a few of the gods went along with it. I think one of them was Poseidon. Maybe one of them was like Hephaestus, and he was like, for the entire year, you guys have to go to Troy and help him fix the city. So that's why they say the walls of Troy were like built by Poseidon.
So yeah, Tartarus sounds like a pretty bad place. Tartarus does not have...
That's what you would envision hell.
Yeah. Outer darkness, hell, anything like that, where everything was a black pit for the bad.
Yeah, so without the fire. So fire would be light and everything, so it just basically keeps you in darkness.
He took a wife, Persephone. We had talked about her earlier, and we'll talk about her again. I believe she was the daughter of Demeter and Zeus. Again, the daughter of Demeter and Zeus. And I got to repeat that because Hades really took a liking to her. And he's like, well, I got to figure out how to get a hold of her. Let me talk to Zeus. He's like, kidnap her. You're a god. Take her. I don't think you understand how this works.
Okay, listen, man. These kids are driving me fucking nuts. They're all in my house. Just fucking take her. Get her out of my house. I don't care if she's your niece. Get her out of my house.
Yeah, he swoops her up, takes her to the underworld. This really pisses off Persephone. She goes into just a rage and a very, very deep depression.
Demeter does.
Or Demeter, yeah. Demeter goes into a very deep depression.
What do you mean? You gave her to her uncle.
You gave our kid away?
What the fuck do you mean? He's like, these kids are driving me crazy. I would just want to get rid of them. I need to get them out of the house. Your uncle, the one that lives in the basement, the creepy one that lives in the basement, you gave our beautiful daughter?
Yeah.
Hey, it's too late. You already got her. We'll make another one. Or I'll make another one.
So Demeter goes down to find Persephone, and when she gets down there, she finds out that Hades had fed her the fruit of the underworld, which is pomegranates. And once he fed her pomegranates, that made her the queen of the underworld and his wife. There was some argument going on, and the decision was to be made by Zeus, who said that Persephone would spend 3 months in the underworld and the rest of the time up with her mother, Demeter.
Now, what was Demeter the goddess of?
She was the goddess of agriculture and seasons. and she was the goddess of agriculture and seasons. It was believed that in the wintertime when things wouldn't grow would be the time that Persephone was spending time down with Hades in the underworld.
She was pissed. She was like, now it comes time for the 3 months. No one's going to be fucking happy. Nothing will grow.
Which, again, this is a real conversation that somebody probably had with, like, hey, man, how come stuff doesn't just grow all the time? Why do we have to have an off-season? He's like,
And why is it all cold and shit?
Uh-huh.
Like, well, the goddess of agriculture had a daughter. Who's her dad? The main guy, Zeus. And then Hades took her.
Cold and Hades, probably. Real dark.
Yep.
Not super fun to be outside. Yeah, that's when she's down there, that's just a sad time of year. So yeah, after that, we got to go into Hera. She's the queen of the gods and the goddesses. She's the goddess of marriage. She's the goddess of women, childbirth, and family. And
Zeus was having a lot of children and expanding the family. So, I mean, in that sense, do you think he used that as an argument? She's like, I am the goddess of marriage. And women, he's like, yeah, but you're also the goddess of childbirth and family. And I'm having kids and making families. So technically, I'm kind of doing this for you.
I'm trying to show people that you really are the goddess of children.
You love family so much that you want them to have the same joy that you had when you had children. Am I such a bad man for that?
Guy just literally wanted to spread his seed everywhere and just tried to justify it any way that he could. But
you think I want to have sex with these cows?
He went from being married to his aunt to being married to the youngest daughter of Cronus and Rhea, as in his sister. So I don't really know if that's a lateral move or a step up in the incest hierarchy, but regardless, he made a move.
He's running out of siblings. He can only marry so many of them. Maybe he's just moving through. She was just next on the list.
True. She played a part in a lot of anger towards the women that, rightfully so. Maybe not so much the fact that it was the women's fault, but Zeus, I think, had a lot of power, and if they said no, Zeus didn't really understand what no meant.
Zeus was rape factory. Like, a lot of these women were not, as many of the women in these tales that were willing to sleep with Zeus, 3 to 4 of them were unwilling participants in all this. And despite Hera being the goddess of women, she was like, these fucking whores. And so she had a vendetta against these women, and then most of the time their children, who were also around a lot because some of them were demigods and some of them were gods.
Yeah. And one such event, she kind of became the enemy of Heracles. And that was after Zeus stepped out on her with Leto, I believe. We'll talk about that. Maybe not Leto, maybe Leto.
I love how the Disney movie spun it to where Hercules was actually Hera and Zeus's son. So they didn't have to explain the fact that Zeus was just plowing everything under Mount Olympus.
I have very, very fleeting memories of a lot of Disney movies. I think I did see Hercules. Isn't Hades like a blue flame guy?
He's got blue flame for hair.
Okay, yeah. And it was
James Woods.
Was it?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Before he went crazy
and
too.
Rip Torn was Zeus.
Yeah, well.
You can dodge a wrench. You can dodge a ball.
So yeah, she sent 2 serpents to kill him as a baby, and since he was Heracles and Hercules and the strongest man that there was, he just went ahead and throttled those 2 snakes to death as he laid in his crib. When it came to adulthood, she was the one that drove him crazy and drove him to kill his family, which sets off him going through the 12 trials of Hercules.
This is, if anyone has ever played the God of War series, this is very similar. I don't think it's Hera that does it. I think it might be Ares that actually forces him to kill his family, but he's also a son of Zeus. So, like, so many things that we don't even realize borrow from this type of mythology. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, too, about the whole creation myth with man is, remember when I know you probably spaced out on the Lord of the Rings episode. You had a glass overlook in your eyes at about the 2-hour mark. But the story behind the creation of dwarves in that is that the blacksmith of the gods made them out of, like, stone and then brought them to life.
Yeah.
So it's just, Tolkien borrowing from Greek mythology.
I think that seems like it's a. I definitely see how there's that connection there, but also I think we talked about it wasn't the Inca. It might have been. No, it was the Inca that were made out of mud and they traveled around.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of makes sense to just go from like the earth to make clay figures and then give them life.
We are children of the earth.
Yeah.
And that's why we're bound to the earth
Yep.
or something like that.
I think it's definitely a pretty widely used idea, which again, I don't know if it came from that or it just kind of made sense in the scenario.
Do you know what's funny about the 12 labors too? Is I had no idea. So basically, as punishment for, Hercules kills his whole family. So it's like his penance for them to like accept him again. He has to basically be put into indentured servitude to this like king, like this mortal king. And the king is just fucking with him the whole time and sending him out to do these. He's like, so I'm going to have you do some errands for me. You're going to kill this, capture this, do this. And then he keeps tacking on stuff.
Oh, go hang out with Atlas and hold up the sky too.
Yeah,
Like,
he's got some apples that I want. Oh, see these stables here? I'm going to need you to clean out these stables. By the way, they haven't been cleaned out in 200 years, and they're like football fields and football fields big.
well, and the brilliance, I think, of that story, and I'm pretty excited to do the Hercules episode, was it kind of shows all of the cunning and ability and the thought that Hercules wasn't just a hunk.
Yeah.
He had a good mind on him, too.
I think Hercules, the creation of Hercules, had to, at some point, when, they're creating these myths and everything, or writing their versions of these myths, just to make it more accessible when you start having gods that are part human and like demigods and everything, because they give you more of a connection to that.
Oh, yeah.
So the story of Hercules, with his bravery and everything, that, people are like, well, that's his human side and everything. He's just a man. He's just really strong.
Yeah, he could be one of us. Again, like you were talking about earlier. Well, if that happened to him, there could still be a connection. I could meet a god. This could happen to me.
You're talking to your audience like as someone who's just creatively storytelling.
Zeus could come down and cuck me and bang my wife, and maybe we have a second Hercules. Who knows?
Yeah. Hey, honey, just so you know, if like a bull shows up or an eagle or a giant glowing ball of light,
a goose.
it starts raining gold on you, just kind of prop yourself up and maybe open those legs.
Let take it. Whatever it is, just accept
you
what
have
happens.
my permission.
Yep. He's your hall pass. Zeus is my hall pass. Next, we run into Demeter, who is Ceres. Forgot to mention, Hera is Juno. That is her Roman name. Demeter is Ceres. She's the goddess of harvest, fertility, agriculture, nature, and
Seasons.
She's the middle daughter, and she's the mother of Persephone, like we talked about. She was pursued by Poseidon, changed form into a mare, again, a horse, who was sexed by Poseidon. He decided not to change his appearance. He just kept her as a horse, a mare.
Well, why is she doing that? He's the god of horses. Or is this how he became the god of horses? Someone caught him having sex with this horse and is like, hey, check it out, guys. It's like an ironic thing. It's like, hey, if it isn't the Lord of Horses. Walks in the room and everyone is just applauding him.
Yeah. After that, she kind of takes a long look at her life for a second and kind of takes a little bit of a leave of absence to cleanse herself after her older brother Poseidon just committed the ultimate sin. And in her absence, there were droughts that were caused, there were animals that died, there was a great famine that hit the world. And that was a belief that since she was the queen of the seasons and the harvest, that if she was sad, just like she was with Persephone when she was gone, that no life would be able to grow.
I wonder who wrote that. Like, because a famine, obviously, they did happen. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if it's like, oh man, people are starving out in the streets, it's like, this is going to be great. This is going to be a great story. I'm already writing this thing down.
Well, and there's so much of this. This has kind of been a conversation between Chris and I, just ongoing. I don't really have an obsession with Noah's Ark, but there's something about it where I feel like people try to prove it so much, and it comes up in so many different places. It even comes up in Greek mythology. Prometheus's son and his wife were I guess they had known that Zeus was going to cleanse the earth with a great flood. And so they had created this special, like, chest that they were both to crawl inside. And as the flood happened, the chest would then float and they wouldn't sink. Once the water resided, they got out and they repopulated the earth using, I think it was Prometheus's dead wife's bones, something along those lines. But every single time this shit pops up and there's some other Noah's Ark myth, we had kind of thought about it for a little while. And at one point, I think it was probably during the Athens episode, maybe Constantinople, but all of these seas that were all inland, the Aegean, the Mediterranean, everything like that, at one point during the Ice Age, they were all dry. And there were pieces of land that as the water level rose, they would break through, they would fall down into these great basins that were just the kind of the flood zone.
You already have cultures that are centered with their survival around waterways.
Yeah.
They're the first to go. When those levels start to rise and everything, and right there, until you got to the higher mountains and everything, if you only survived a couple of you, then, there's your flood myth.
Yeah, it feels so plausible just from that point of view, and I've never really believed in Noah's Ark, but thinking about it in that respect has kind of changed my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't think that there was a Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark was obviously bullshit because you couldn't get two of every animal and build that big ass thing and all that kind of stuff. But the fact that there's flood myths in so many different areas and saying that the world was flooded, well, your world was flooded. The whole world wasn't flooded. Everything that you knew.
There were 100 instances of this.
And it could have just been simply water levels rising.
Maybe that's the whole believability about it, is that every culture has a situation where this might have happened to them, something along the lines of, their ancestors of being forced away because there was a flood. Regardless of when it was, if it was 100 years ago, it would have seemed like forever ago. And so when this story comes out about Noah's Ark, everyone has an association because it was something similar that happened in their cultures.
Well, and I think that perfectly explains a famine, because a famine is going to just happen. That's what happens with weather patterns and everything like that. So every time a famine happens, you can be like, oh, well, Demeter is just really, really sad because Poseidon or Hades or Zeus or somebody got to her.
Next up, we have Aphrodite, also known as Venus, the goddess of love, pleasure, passion, procreation, fertility, beauty, desire. She was the daughter of Uranus, the daughter of Uranus Nut, and the ocean foam. I'm glad I didn't reread that before. I like the genuine reaction to that. With her, so she ends up marrying Hephaestus. Now, Hephaestus, after Zeus had been cheating on Hera for a while, and got pregnant with Hephaestus, she ended up telling Zeus that, like, Hephaestus was just, like, her kid, like, Zeus had no hand in it. She was just like, nope, I did it myself. You were out fucking your whores, and so I just made this kid myself. Well, then, I think because of that, and she made a big deal of it, Zeus was like, nope, and literally chucked Hephaestus off fucking Mount Olympus. He's like, this isn't my kid. She's like, it's no one's kid. I made it myself. She's like, that can't happen. I've made enough children to know that can't happen. So he chucks Hephaestus off Mount Olympus and, like, ends up fucking up, like, his face or his arm. His leg.
He had a drag as he walked, they said.
That's right. And so because of this, in order to, like, once he grows up and everything, in order to make up for this through some roundabout way, he ends up, I think he crafts a chair. And it's to get back at Hera for something, for, like, you let him throw me off Mount Olympus or some shit. And so he creates this chair for Hera that when she sits in it, it freezes her into the chair and she cannot get out of it. And in order to get her out of it, Zeus has to basically be like, okay, what the fuck do you want? Name your price. He's like, I want Aphrodite. And Zeus is like, fuck, fine, you can have Aphrodite.
Well, he was not a handsome man.
No.
He was a very, very ugly individual. And Aphrodite was the hottest of the hot. She was the woman that everybody wanted. Aphrodite is a temptress, to say the least. She gets around quite a bit, and she does some cucking of Hephaestus coming up that we'll have to talk about kind of with him. There's so many different fun stories with each one of these that tie into it, so I don't really know how to break them down because most of these stories involve multiple gods. So there's just certain different things about the way that all of it works.
It's basically reality TV antiquity.
Yeah.
Is what it is. Like like imagine how much people like fucking drama on TV and shows like that.
Yeah.
Like when you're a playwright and these poets, you're just like, oh, what's the juiciest shit we can have happen here?
And true to form, a god named Adonis, or I guess he was a man named Adonis. He was the son of Myra, and Myra was cursed by Aphrodite to fall in love with her king, who was also her father. She ends up hooking up with her king and the
King
dad, yeah. And they have Adonis. Once it's found out that Mira's husband or the progenitor of the child was the king, she ends up getting kicked out, has to leave Adonis. Aphrodite then finds Adonis, doesn't really like being tied down with a kid. She swoops down to the underworld and is like, hey, Persephone, I don't think you and Hades can have kids. Something about the underworld, maybe. I don't know. I don't really understand your guys' realm. You want a kid to take care of? She's like, yeah, sure, whatever. I got to be down here for 3 months. I'd at least like something to do. So she goes ahead and raises Adonis. Adonis was a handsome boy.
That's where you get the term an Adonis.
Yep. Adrian Adonis, a very fat, not attractive old wrestler, but where the name goes. And once you get Adonis growing up, Aphrodite comes back to get him. She's like, ooh, that's a piece of ass. I like that.
He's like, who are you?
Yeah.
Hey,
have we met?
it's me, Adonis. She's like, oh.
So?
Oh.
Aphrodite's like, okay, I'm taking this hunk with me. I'm getting out of here. Persephone's like, no. I raised him.
She's like the horny ant that comes over. The horny step ant that comes over. And she's like, no, get away from him.
And so there becomes this fight over Adonis. Persephone wants to keep him and keep jumping his bones, probably because Hades is a weird lover, I'm sure. Aphrodite's like, no, I need me a piece of this guy. I was the one that found him and brought him to you. I get him back.
I trained him. He knows what I like.
So Zeus decides to settle the dispute, because that's what Zeus does. For as poor a judgment as Zeus has...
We're going to Zeus with this. It's like dun dun dun. People's Court with Zeus up there.
Judge Joe Brown is Hermes, just hanging around, or the
bailiff.
The bailiff is Hermes. So Zeus settles the dispute in a 1/3 compromise. 1/3 of the year he gets to bang Persephone. 1/3 of the year he gets to bang Aphrodite, and then 1/3 of the year he gets to bang a woman of his own choice, which. Pretty diplomatic move on Zeus's part.
Good for Adonis.
Well, I think this would be Zeus's answer if Zeus was Adonis.
There you go.
He wanted to keep his options open. So he's like, yeah, I'll throw this kid a bone. Maybe he'll like this.
He looks at him. He's like, handsome man. He's like, thank you. He's like to bang. He's like,
yeah.
He's like, you're gonna love this deal.
Let's not forget with old Zeus. Zeus also found himself. This is the one episode that I was okay to allow myself to hear the word pederasty more than the allotted amount of times, which I like hearing it, which is none. A lot of pederasty talk. Zeus had a proclivity to tempt young, handsome human boys and bring them back up to Olympus and have his way with them. So, again, when I say the guy was fucking nouns...
When you say 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, are you sure it wasn't 1/3 Persephone, 1/3 Aphrodite, 1/3 Zeus?
Could be, yeah. He wanted to leave his options open just in case that door was there. So we get to Aphrodite's husband, Hephaestus. Hephaestus's Roman name was Vulcan. It's the name of an anvil company. Vulcan is, I think, pretty well known as far as to do like blacksmithing tools and that kind of a thing. Vulcan Death Grip, don't think it has anything to do with that. Maybe
it's spelled differently.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
You're
no, it is. No.
that.
You're correct. It is spelled the same. I'm sure that has something to do with like
it's a grip of iron.
That's it's like the Iron Sheik, whatever they called that. But what's kind of interesting about that too is when they were looking at names like a blacksmithing company, they're like, man, Hephaestus just doesn't sound. Hephaestus Incorporated doesn't sound great. They're like, well, he was known as Vulcan in Rome. They're like, why don't you fucking lead with that?
Yeah, what we can write this way easier.
Yeah.
This is going to be way easier for people to say and read. He was a master blacksmith and a craftsman. He was the god of forging. He was the god of forging, not foraging. God of craftsmanship. He invented fire, and he was the god of volcanoes. It was said that Hephaestus actually built all of the buildings on Olympus, and that he was the one that crafted the world up there.
All of like the armor, like breastplate, like the chariot for Apollo, like he.
Hephaestus was the one that created the suit of armor for Achilles.
Yeah.
After his mother went up there and gave her the old Mrs. Gump treatment to get the armor.
Man, your mama sure does want you to get this suit of armor.
He was actually tossed off. I don't know if it was two different stories or if it was one story that Chris talked about with Zeus tossing him off. I heard another story.
Do you think it was Jack Black, Ron Burgundy style? Where he goes, this is how I roll and kicks a baby.
Could be. Just kicked him like a soccer ball. But he had been thrown off a second time in another story where after Hera had him, she looked at it, was like, this kid's ugly as shit, and just tossed him down the mountain. And every time Hephaestus has had to climb back up the mountain after a parent's rejection.
Why?
Every time they had an argument, Hephaestus tried to run in and stop it, and one of them just fucking slapped him off the mountain. Again, the husband of Aphrodite's, but he divorced her after he caught her having sex with Ares in a real kind of cheaters type way. He had found out that Aphrodite and Ares were hooking up, two hot bods rubbing together. He's like, well, I got to catch him somehow. Master of blacksmithing, he made himself a net that was so tightly wound.
He mousetraps it. He basically does the mousetrap game where he suspends this like golden net above the bed where they're going to be banging. And then it literally, as soon as they start banging, he just drops. He's like, gotcha.
And he's like, hey, honey, headed off the mountain, going down to do some blacksmithing stuff. She's like, okay, honey, I'll see you later. And he just stands in the hall against the wall. He's like, and as soon as Ares goes ahead and sneaks in, he springs the trap.
I just see him with
drops
like,
it. You think it was scissors?
Scissors with a rope, just waiting to be like, banger, get it in there.
Then after he goes ahead and he drops that on top of them, they can't get out. And the normal thing a guy in this situation would do is he went to all the other gods. He's like, hey guys, you won't believe what's going on in here. My wife's a whore. Come in and watch what's going on. All the other gods show up and see Ares and Aphrodite's trapped under this net, and they just find it funny as hell. Just some of the funniest shit ever. Just immediately start laughing at him, thinking that he's a cuck.
Talk about your all-time backfires.
Yeah, it didn't work out in his favor. Yeah, so just a very interesting way.
You got to feel for Hephaestus.
Yeah, he seems like a good guy.
I just want to go in my shop and build shit.
I like blacksmithing.
Fucking behind my back and throwing me off Olympus.
The poor guy just couldn't catch a break. His parents kept throwing him off the mountain. His wife was banging Ares. Just really didn't work out well for him.
Well, and he actually ends up creating Pandora.
Is he?
Yep. So he's the one that ends up creating Pandora.
The first woman.
Yes, the first woman, Pandora. Not to get too far into the story, but Pandora was basically given this. It's known as Pandora's box, but in Greek mythology, she was given this jar, like this big mason jar, and in it basically were all of the qualities of mankind. And before this,
flawed qualities. It was the sadness. It was like all the bad stuff.
Correct, but there was something that was kept in it that was positive. So it was pretty much everything. And through her curiosity and everything, she was told never to open this, but she opens it, and what gets out into the world is despair and sadness and death. And she is able to essentially keep in the jar where she closes it, is she's able to keep hope in there, which to me doesn't make sense because you would want hope out in the world, but for some reason it didn't allow hope to escape, so it kept hope within mankind. Again, this story is written how many years ago from somebody just trying to write a bunch of shit and being like, so wait, you're telling me hope is in the jar? And he's like, yeah, hope's in the jar, but she doesn't let it out. They're like, so people don't have hope? He's like, well, no, people get to keep hope because it's in the jar. Well, if murder was still in the jar, people wouldn't be murdering down there. So once it's out of the jar is when people have it. He's like, Listen, I've already sent this to the publisher. I can't change this shit now. All the scribes are already making copies, so just go along with it.
Monkey's out of the bottle, man. Monkey doesn't go back in the bottle.
Oh, so we come to Athena. Her Roman name is it Minerva?
Minerva. Got a rough break on the Roman name.
Man, go from a real hero to zero situation there.
Yeah.
A reverse glow up. Goddess of wisdom, handcraft, and warfare. Pretty badass to have Athena be the goddess of warfare.
Oh,
out
shit,
there,
yeah.
Can you imagine out there in that suit of armor, just probably looking hot as shit.
Do you think any of this was like porn for the Greek people?
Buddy, how many times have we talked about people banging in here?
Yeah.
No other plays and stories. You don't get Shakespeare where you just get a 5-minute scene of someone having sex with a cow and then turning it back into like everyone's just banging here. Yeah. That's the Greeks didn't have hang-ups on this kind of stuff.
So the Greeks might have started kinks, is what you're telling me.
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Athena would probably be what would be considered a muscle mommy.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yep. Some lady that's out there chopping wood and it does something for you and you just can't quite figure it out.
Are you familiar with that woman on Instagram? I know of what you speak.
Reels encompass really everything.
All right, so the Lady of Athens, protectress of heroes. She helps Hercules in 4 of his 12 trials, and then also helps Odysseus out during the Odyssey.
Yeah, she's the one that's whispering in Odysseus' ear trying to get him back home. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, Odysseus is a very distractible man.
She does have a little bit of a hot streak, though. You don't want to catch her out of her armor when she's not expecting it, because there was this guy named, is it Tiresias?
Yep.
So Tiresias was a hunter, I believe, and he made the mistake of accidentally walking upon her while she was bathing herself. I'm guessing out in some type of like river, stream, waterfall based scenario. Mm-hmm. He's out there just hunting with his dogs.
Something real picturesque.
Mm-hmm. And I don't blame the guy.
No.
He sees this goddess bathing. Well, she catches her spine on him and basically turns him into a stag, a deer.
Oh, no. This guy just gets turned blind.
Oh, this is just the blind guy. Okay.
You're thinking of Artemis, and that's...
Oh, gotcha.
That's
okay.
Again, these two things cross paths in very weird ways.
Okay.
Yeah, she just goes ahead and is like, hey, you got to see the best show of your life. Now you can't see anything anymore.
Thank you.
If that's the last thing that guy got to see, he might have been pretty good off. Athens is a very classy broad. Again, like we talked about, she goes ahead and beats Poseidon by giving the olive tree. Athens being her founding city,
gotcha.
You have probably the greatest, tied again with Artemis, is like the greatest what would you call that? Like, buildings in her honor, like structures.
Oh yeah, like the best examples of like fucking structures of worship and like statues and
the whole city is just built around, again, like we talked about in the Athens episode, it's built around the Pantheon. Mm-hmm. It's built around the Acropolis and in the area where she was just absolutely worshipped. That's the first thing that they go to restore when they restore things. Just a very important figure.
And there's some debate. They think now that based upon like what they've seen for the writings and the poets putting all this together, is that they wonder if essentially she was created based on Athens as like a patron god of Athens, like representative of the city. But then at the same time, so the argument is if that was the case, then she became so popular that they literally had government-sponsored temples and statues and everything like that created. So to look at it that way, it's like, fuck, these people really bought into it. I almost like it the other way where they built the city with her in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it feels like that way makes more sense to me.
Moving on to Ares, Roman equivalent would be Mars, the god of war. People familiar with that game will be well aware of Ares. God of violence, bloodshed, manliness.
Manly virtues, baby. Talk about some only dudes wrote poetry back then. Son of Zeus and Hera. So again, at least he kept that one in the family. Well, kept that one to his wife. He keeps a lot of stuff in the family. He helped the founding of Thebes by creating a water dragon that was slain by a guy named Cadmus. The dragon's teeth were then planted in the ground to make them fertile enough to grow crops. Cadmus married Ares' daughter, Harmonica, and they founded the city of Thebes, a great ancient city that probably needs a lot more looking into just because of all the culture that went through Thebes. A lot of these poets that we had talked about earlier that wrote this had spent a lot of times in Thebes as well.
That's where you get thespians, right?
Gotta be.
Is from Thebes, I think. It was well known as like where you had Sparta, which was known as warfare, Athens for its like navy. Thebes would essentially be like more intellectually centered, I think.
Yeah. Probably more of like the playwright stage. I'm sure they had a really big amphitheater. But yeah, Ares was a badass. He was a certified badass. He shows up fighting in Homer's epics, is just kind of everywhere, spotted all around.
I mean, they're tailor-made for him. It's just a bunch of battles. He's going to be the one that everyone's reaching out to help him win these fights.
And again, absolutely snookered by Aphrodite's. Just they had a real love hot body
I don't
relationship.
think anyone had a chance. She was the goddess of love. She knew some tricks.
Yeah, it's true. Even if they weren't into her, they were going to be into her.
Next, we have Hermes, known as Mercury to the Romans, basically the messenger of the gods, god of travel, commerce, communication, borders, eloquence, diplomacy, thieves, and games. I love that there's thieves in there.
Thieves and Games takes a real like right turn away from everything else.
Yeah, but I love that there was a god that represented the thieves. Like he sees someone pickpocketing, he's like, "I see you, player."
Yeah. He was the son of Zeus and a nymph named Maya, and he was regarded as the divine trickster.
Like a Loki type character.
Had a lot of fun, it seems like. The wing sandals and the helmet with the wings on it are kind of
the original Flash wore.
two very just really big things that have carried over today. Gold wing boots.
Red Wing.
Red Wing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Red Wing boots. Again, the same idea with their logo with the
Feathered wing coming off the boot.
Yeah. So he's kind of transcended into regular culture as well. Homer wrote that he was the protector of Priam. As he went to get Hector's body from the Greek camp, and that was when the Greeks were dragging Hector around and really making a mockery of him. He accompanied him along that way, and he shows up in stories like they talk about as a messenger. I believe he was able to, because he was able to fly so quickly and he was able to move so freely, he could kind of transfer between divine and mortal worlds very quickly.
Yeah, like he had to be able to get to Hades really quickly to be able to deliver messages, Olympus really quickly, the mortal world really quickly. Next up, we have Apollo, who actually transitioned over to keep his name.
This is a real ping pong situation.
Yeah. God of sun, light, prophecy, philosophy. He was an archer, or archery. Truth, inspiration, poetry, music, art, manly beauty. At some point, when there were not gods of things, I think that they started just kind of like, in the episode of The Office where they're divvying out the beans to develop races to determine. I think at some point they just have all these qualities and they had this big pile in the middle and they're running out of gods to create. And they're like, just keep flicking some over here. They're like sunlight, archery, inspiration, music, son of Zeus and Leto.
And depending on when these gods came into these poems, if you have to explain shit, you're just going to start adding more things on because the more that you enrich that character, the more you can do with them.
Fantastic resume.
Yeah.
He was the twin brother of Artemis and the inventor of string music. He invented the lyre.
I don't know if I enjoy lyre music or not. I listened to a little bit of it just to kind of try
It's just harp, right?
Yeah. Very much so. Baby Apollo had seen a vision of killing a python, and it was a serpent dragon. Wanted to ask you this question. dragons in Greek mythology and dragons in Asian mythology. What do you think came first?
I'm not sure because I think the dragons in I think there's like a couple different like viewpoints of that. So the dragons in Greek mythology were like basically like giant serpents, like water serpents and stuff like that. They weren't really like dragons per se. They were more like serpents, I guess. You then have like medieval mythology, and that's where you get like the dragons with like wings and stuff like that.
8 gold, 8 treasure.
Yes, and then you get in like for like the Chinese version, I think that's where you get more of like the ones that had like the whiskers and the red ones with the scales and everything like that that could breathe fire that were like really long. So I think you get different versions of it. So I think when, and I think its name was its name Python?
Yeah.
And did they name the snake after that or was it named after the snake?
That's probably what they named the snake after.
That's, yeah, I don't know.
Huh. I didn't think about all those differences, and I guess maybe we just kind of lumped them all in as like, oh, that's a dragon. You guys are just talking about dragons.
So this sea serpent or this dragon serpent Python, he was the guardian of the Oracle of Delphi. The Oracle of Delphi was this insanely important figure in Greek mythology and actual Greek like culture. So basically, the Oracle was this woman who was said to have kind of the microphone to the gods and have prophecies and be able to kind of like see the future and would basically just get high off of burning whatever the fuck like ergot, I don't know what it was, but would go into these like rages and spasms and everything and would be just shouting nonsensical fucking words and they would interpret from those words like what the prophecies or what the message was supposed to be. So crazy that it's basically like going to like a meth addict and being like, "Okay, I'm gonna need you to smoke this real quick, and then I'm gonna need you to tell me what to do."
Well, throwback to a very recent episode, the Oracle of Delphi was the one that told Byzus to build his town across from the blind people.
There you go.
So it was just such a center of wisdom that if you had to have a question, you had to go straight to the Oracle and get the answer because they were the only one that were going to give you the correct answer.
So Apollo ends up killing Python, who was the guardian, and as Apollo was basically seeking worship, he had run across the snake, he killed it with a single arrow, and then declared himself as the deity of Delphi. So basically he was just like, you know that snake that you guys had guarding you? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, so I killed it, so now you pray to me.
I'll keep the Oracle safe.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that. I'll take that role over. But when I do that, I get to be the deity of Delphi,
Yes.
which is great alliteration.
Anything that she does well is because of me. Go ahead.
We got to dive into his twin sister, Artemis. She was Diana in Roman rule, or Roman mythology. She was the goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, virginity, which is shocking that a god would still have that, or a goddess would still have
Had
that.
to assign it to somebody.
Yeah. The moon, archery, childbirth, protection, and plague. She also, again, since she was the twin of Apollo, she was the daughter of Zeus and Leto. And Artemis was... it's interesting to me that they made that their misogynistic beliefs on life led them to make her the goddess of archery. You would think that that would be more like a war masculine type thing to make a god of, not a goddess of.
Her brother was also a god of archery,
Yeah.
and they made sure to make it a point that she wasn't as good as him.
Okay.
But because they were twins, she'd inherited some of that skill. But yeah, she wasn't. They made a clear point to be like she was like the second god. Like if that guy wasn't available, then like you could call her.
And like I was talking about with Athens treating Athena in such a way, building these monuments to her, her temple at Ephesus, I believe is how you pronounce it, was one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. So Ephesus built a temple for Artemis that was considered one of the 7 coolest things in the world.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big flex to have that in there. Actaeon, this is the guy that was similar to the story earlier. Actaeon the hunter had spied on the virgin nakedness of Artemis while he was out hunting and she was bathing. And as punishment, she went ahead and turned him into a stag. Well, the issue with that is when he was out hunting, he was using hunting dogs.
And like 50 of them.
Yeah. And so when she turns him into a stag, the hunting dogs don't recognize who he is and immediately attack him and tear him apart. Mm-hmm. So blindness, torn apart by your own hunting dogs, I'll take blindness.
They have to ratchet it up.
Yeah,
she can't just make him blind. They've already done that. That's old hat. So what do we do next? We turn him into an animal and have his dogs eat him.
Well, and Actaeon was a virgin. Actaeon was pure. Nobody had ever laid eyes on her nakedness before. So that's a much bigger charge. Finally, we get to...
he's got to be the favorite.
Got to be the favorite.
He's got to be the one that people have worshipped the most in their own way.
I like him because it's a kind of a deep cut, I think, but God of Wine from Third Eye Blind is one of my favorite Third Eye songs. Absolutely fantastic. Is every time I heard about Dionysus, I just immediately started hearing it in my head. He's the god of wine, like I say, god of the grapevine, festivity, fertility, ecstasy, madness, and resurrection. He was the son of Zeus and Semele, and he was just there for a good time. He was followed around by these guys called satyrs, which are my favorite characters in this whole crazy story. They were half man, half goat. Usually they had the horns on top of their heads. They had hooved feet and raging erections pretty much at all times. Mm-hmm. All of the depictions of them...
Danny DeVito's character in Hercules was a satyr.
Was he?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just really pretty crazy beings.
Just a bunch of horny goat dudes just playing flutes behind him, getting the party started.
Yeah, they hung out with Pan. They loved playing the flutes. I'm sure the Pan flute was probably created because of him. When Chris says real horny guys, there's accounts of like people walking through the forest and seeing these satyrs tugging one out on a tree. They were really...
Probably just the village masturbator, to be honest with you. And they're like, yeah, I saw him out there jerking off. They're like, oh, that was just a satyr.
That was Pete the satyr.
Yeah.
Got to watch out for him. Don't get too
satyr.
close. He was the master... Yeah, Pete was the master satyr. You don't want to get too close. If you get within arm's reach, he's going to stop jerking off pretty quickly, and you're going to be in a real bad position. But this crazy-ass Semele story... So, Semele was tricked by Hera into believing that Zeus was not her lover. Zeus had to appear in certain forms with mortals because seeing Zeus or seeing the power of a god would kill someone.
Seeing Zeus in his natural form was more than any mortal could bear.
So, what Hera had told her after she befriended her, I'm sure Hera befriending you as a mortal was probably a pretty big deal. She's like, well... if he really is Zeus, I kind of need to know. So what you're going to need to do is ask him to appear in his godlike form so you'll know that it's Zeus. Zeus, drunk on sex, comes back down to Semele and probably wants to get him another piece. And real happy to see her. She's like, you need to do something for me. He's like, deal, done, whatever. Where's the river Styx?
He's already taken off his clothes and everything. She's like, hey, can I ask you a question? He's like, yeah, what? She's like, well, would you do anything for me? He's like, yes. And she's like, promise? He's like, yes, what is it? And she's
Where's the river Styx? I'll put my hand on it. Let's get this going.
Get your pants off. And it was basically like, I need to see you as you are. I need the full Zeus treatment. And he's like, I don't think you want that. And she's like, you told me you would give me anything I want. And he's like, fuck. Yeah, I guess I did. And I basically see him like unrobing. And as he does, a real Pulp Fiction moment where you start to see the glow.
Yeah.
Or a real Raiders of the Lost Ark situation where you open it up. And basically she is immediately reduced to ash. After that, Zeus closes the robe, lights go out in the room, and he's just like, God damn it.
We didn't even bang first.
He looks down, he's got his erection. He's just like, what am I supposed to do with this thing? Walks outside. Moo.
Game on. So, you would think that would be where the story ends. Definitely not where the story ends. Dionysus is known as the person who is born twice. And as he walked over to the pile of ash, he saw baby Dionysus, I guess, in the womb that must not have disintegrated or something like that. Or maybe it was just a baby laying there.
He's also a god.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Wasn't fully formed, so Zeus goes ahead and scoops up Dionysus and puts him inside of his own thigh. He sewed him into his own thigh, where Dionysus then lived in Zeus's thigh, which I'm sure Hera had some questions about what was going on with Zeus's thigh. 2 months
What
later...
do you think I have in there? You think I got like a kid in my thigh? You sound crazy, Hera.
Just gaslighting the shit out of her.
A kid in my thigh.
Well, I mean, what, you're going to hold this against me that fucking Athena popped out of my head? I didn't know she was in there. Mm-hmm. I don't think anything's in my leg. I understand it looks like a man that's in my leg. It's not. I promise. 2 months later, fully formed, fully adult-sized Dionysus is then birthed from Zeus's thigh. Ah! You think every time...
Pop his head out. Let's get this party started.
Every time Hera's pregnant, and Zeus is like, quit bitching. I don't want to hear it anymore. And she's like, you don't understand what childbirth is like. He's like, oh yeah? You don't think I understand? I had my head split open for one of my kids. The other one shot out of my leg.
I do feel like you could see, like, it's a crazy story as it is, but you could definitely see the progression of it getting a little bit more extreme, kind of as time went on and as these different gods get introduced. I just love the fact that this was so widely recognized and worshipped that it's still the most like widely recognized form of mythology.
I'm just so glad there was a tipping point. I'm so glad that it turned from a religion that spawned a bunch of cults into just mythology. Because that's sort of what the change is.
I mean, are we really any better off?
Oh, that's a good point. I don't really know. Because...
I think this is more interesting.
Far more interesting. I think the reason that it might have gone out of favor, two reasons, kind of like we were talking about before the episode, was this was such a place of learning and understanding that eventually the intelligence started to outweigh the mythology, where it's like, well, we can actually explain why all this stuff is happening and not that one of the gods touched us and made
basic understanding of rationality and laws of nature caught up to where it was to people who were like, yeah, this doesn't sound right. Then you had to basically bring in a religion. Maybe that's why other religions like Christianity took hold, is because it was more... There weren't as many answers in it. It wasn't as outrageous, I guess. It was more simplified. And plus, at a certain point, do you think people were just like, man, our deities are kind of douchebags? Like, fucking blinding people for accident. They're bathing out in the woods. Like, people just walk out in the woods. The king of the gods is just coming down banging everybody indiscriminately.
Yeah. I think it's that. I also think that there kind of is a shift from like poetry that's really nonsensical and useless to like parables and teachings of a monotheistic God, where one guy, it's just a straight pipeline of him doing good things and only good things, which I think we're kind of told what religion is. If you read the Old Testament, there's some shit in the Old Testament that is very, very rough.
It's very Greek mythology-esque. Yeah.
So I think you see a transition from the Old Testament into the New Testament, and depending on which version of the Bible, you start to see that stuff go out of favor, because it's hard to sell a god that's killing 40,000 people on a whim.
So it's basically like the Old Testament, and then the New Testament is they kind of like, it's like a property that's acquired by Disney.
Yeah. That's a great...
Yeah, they have to clean up a little bit, and Greek mythology never got the Disney treatment. I mean, it technically actually did get the Disney treatment with the movie, but that's the exact thing, is they took it and had to just clean it up to where everyone was a benevolent figure, and it was 90% of the shit that was actually taken out, and they just were like, this is all the good shit we can take out of it. We're going to be lucky to squeeze one movie out of this.
Stripping this thing down to the bones.
Exactly. So yeah, it never had a chance to get that. Apparently it's had a little bit of a comeback, not like in a major way, but there are certain people over like in Greece and the Mediterranean and everything that are kind of like not believing in this kind of stuff, but they find more like of a national pride of like kind of like paying more attention to this than of modern religions. Because at the same time, if you were to come to me and being like, which one makes more sense, this one or this one, I'm gonna look at this one and be like, this one's, there's like a lot of like batshit crazy stuff going on here, but I can at least understand this a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas the other one is just like, that's too, like, I'm just supposed to take everything on faith on this one. There's no answers in this one. Everyone's favorite answer is, well, he has a plan.
Yeah.
And in this one, it's just like, oh no, the gods were just horny. It's like, I understand that more.
Well, and that's what it is. It's totally relatable, because when you're trying to learn from a religion that anything bad that you do will be punished and there will be retribution for sinning, but then you look at this and it's like, oh, I kind of see what happened here. This feels more realistic to me than just being punished for every bad thing that I've ever done.
They're sinning too.
Yeah.
If anything, they're doing the worst shit.
They can't cast any stones.
Exactly. All right, man. I think we covered this pretty well.
Yeah.
Apologies for the pronunciation of a lot of these, but hey, it's all Greek to us.
Oh, that's good to end on.
Yeah, well, I did that at the very last bit, so everyone might not have heard it. But hey, guys, thanks for joining us on another episode. Remember, rate, review, subscribe. Best way you guys can help us out is with those 5-star ratings. It gets more eyes on the podcast and gets the word out to everyone. On that note, have a good one. Be safe out there, and don't do Greek.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is historically high pod, historically high pod, and we are on Twitter at historically high. That's historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.